Oh, sure. You want me to get out of here?
No, it's fine, it's fine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is your.
Trying to find out.
No, I can, you could. Sorry, I'll put on the computer that, whatever that is.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm also here. No, I was thinking. Not the third.
Third, yeah.
No, I'm ready.
Yeah, Steve, you're after me, right?
Yes.
No,
No, after me.
Amanda's after me now.
No, she's right.
Yeah. Me, Amanda.
Correct. Only one male speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can start. Those who are going to join us, they will be coming in, and those who are following us online are already following us. So let me welcome you all here at our modest Slovenian embassy. All the distinguished professors and scientists, all the guests and participants. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome you here. Slovenia is actually this year celebrating 30 years of our independence, and in the second half of this year we are also serving humbly as the EU presidency. And one of the main priorities during the Slovenian presidency is also fight against this terrible pandemic, COVID. And since our priority is also to strengthen the relations and cooperation between Europe and the United States, namely the transatlantic cooperation, this event, which we will have today, it's in the context of this particular priority, to make Europe, United States, and of course, consequently, the whole global world more resilient and to fight against COVID and the pandemics. So I'm really happy to have you all here. We have the honor, our State Secretary, Deputy Foreign Minister, Dr. Stanislav Raščan, has humbly accepted to say a few words at the beginning. Since he's traveling, his speech is pre-recorded, so I propose that we listen to his welcoming remarks, and then we will kick off, as we say here in the United States. So our Jiri is going to help me so that I don't press the wrong button. Okay.
It is my great pleasure that today at the Symposium organized by Slovenian Embassy in Washington together with the National Institute for Chemistry in Ljubljana, the opportunity to listen to such prominent scientists who will present their achievements in popular science language is a great privilege. We see this very important symposium in the USA as the important event in the context of the Slovenian Presidency of the Council of the European Union from July to December 2021. Slovenia is serving as the EU presidency for the second time after 13 years when we were holding this position in 2008. Among our priorities is making Europe and consequently the transatlantic area more resilient for the pandemics like we are facing now with the COVID-19. For this reason, we are working to strengthen European research area. During our presidency, we would like to upgrade the European research area and direct it towards the creation and greater use of knowledge and more effective decision-making. Some important steps have already been taken when the ministers responsible for research met at the end of September. Beyond the borders of the EU, there is a program called Horizon Europe, which offers US-based researchers the possibility to collaborate with large European projects, as well as to apply for generous grants available to individuals interested in spending part of their careers in Europe. The EU and the US enjoy close ties, shared rules and values form a bond between our transatlantic democracies. The United States remains Europe's most important security and economic partner. Undoubtedly, one of the most important areas of cooperation between the EU and the US is the field of science, which was also reconfirmed at the recent first ever meeting of the EU-US Trade and Technology Council. The pandemic has shown how important a global and shared response is. What's more, it's demonstrated the importance of a science that is quick to respond. It goes without saying that researchers and facilities around the world are playing a key role in the fight against COVID-19. Collaborative efforts in the transatlantic space have been ongoing for many decades and have always involved a highly motivated group of researchers promoting education and encouraging students as well as young colleagues to participate in exchange visits to top research universities. Today's symposium is proof that such cooperation is successful and that it needs to be further strengthened in the future. I wish you a productive and successful work. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. State Secretary. I just spoke to him. He boarded the plane because he was in Odessa. He's really sending his best regards. So my task is now just to introduce all the speakers, and then I will pass the word and the floor to Professor Dr. Janez Plavec, who kindly joined us, and he came from Slovenia. So the prominent speakers today are Dr. Katherine Seley-Radtke. We are welcoming her. Dr. Steven Rokita, welcome. Dr. Jasna Brčić, welcome. Dr. Lilia Jacunyuk, Dr. Sarah Wilson, and Dr. Amanda Bryant-Friedrich. So welcome all the speakers. And now I'm handing over to Professor Dr. Janez Plavec to moderate. We will have then a short break in between, but I'm really looking forward to all the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Dobrodošli. Welcome, everybody. It is a great honor for me to chair this event. I accepted it very gladly. We, colleagues, professors here, and myself are very grateful to Ambassador, Mr. Tone Kaiser, and the staff of the embassy, I should say, because I know lots of things were put into the organizing this event. It might be worth mentioning that actually this might be the first event live, and this is due to your courage. We can actually have, for some of us, in 2 years. So it's an achievement by itself.
But we are all observing the COVID.
Yeah, this is only speaker, clearly only speaker or not. So, wanted to say, time is up, and what I would say, Dr. Rashtan said very nicely, this is very high level political presence. This might be important to some of you. There's some minor changes in the program, and unfortunately, one of the speakers, second speaker, cannot come due to health problems, so Professor Amanda Bryant-Friedrich was kind enough to take his slot, so the program will run. As most of you realize, we have 2 sessions. There will be a short break in between, and I think that's it. Every speaker has 30 minutes. I'll make sure we sort of go in there. Everybody is welcome to ask. Everybody was asked. Speakers were asked to have it an easy going. So this leads me to a very pleasant state of this meeting, introducing the first speaker. So you can, but technically this is ready, yeah? First speaker is Professor Katherine Seley-Radtke. We go Katherine. This is the beauty of US. You're not that formal. Professor Radtke is professor at UMBC, University-American, Baltimore County. This would be the major thing, but I think this is very understated. You will see from her energy. She is world recognized for her work on antiviral research, which is very relevant for the main topic of discussion today. She's been chair and important person. I will not go exactly to function of Society of Nucleosides worldwide. She's chairing a very high position in antiviral community. And perhaps not most, but at least worth mentioning is she's one of the 25 women to watch. This coming from Anne's mouth might sound a little bit funny, I guess. But she was awarded last Thursday the prize from Baltimore Sun's 25 women to watch. Kathy, floor is yours. I don't want to take a minute more.
Thank you, Janusz, for that very nice introduction, and it is an honor to be here today. As Janusz didn't mention, but I am probably one of the biggest cheerleaders for Slovenia. I have been there many times. I love it. He knows that. And so this was a great honor for me. And so today I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we've been working on, but also really more importantly, to sort of talk about the importance of small molecules in the fight against not just COVID, but also against other viruses. And this is, you know, we find ourselves coming up on the year 2 in the pandemic. And when we think about pandemics in general, you can see here, this isn't the first one, and it's definitely not going to be the last one. And we can see here over time, this goes all the way back. I don't think this works really well on this screen, but if you go to, for example, even the Asian flu, the Russian flu, hundreds, and the Spanish flu, just in 1918, and then up into SARS and MERS, and then currently and Ebola, and there's still Ebola outbreaks going on. There's also still MERS outbreaks going on, and part of the problem is we weren't ready for this, and we can't keep that up. We have to be prepared for the next one. So it doesn't like being on this side, so over here. So, yes.
Does the size of that bullet mean anything? How big?
The circle. Oh,
Yeah, the circle, yeah.
no, it doesn't.
Okay.
It's just, it was just a artist representation. So coronaviruses are not new. They've been around for, quite a while. And the first human COVIDs were identified back in the 60s. And, the human COVIDs are very similar to the flu or the cold. It wasn't a big deal until SARS hit. And then SARS was in 2002. There were about over 8,000 cases with around not quite 800 fatalities. And then in 2012, MERS hit, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. That was smaller initially, with about 2,600 confirmed cases, but 886 fatalities, and that's about a 40% death rate. And the problem is that's still spreading in the Middle East. And in 2015, and as I say, even today, this is still going on in a number of countries in the Middle East. But in 2015, there was a second major MERS outbreak in South Korea. And this was absolutely responsible by one person. One super spreader went to the Middle East. They don't know whether he drank camel milk or ate, camel meat or something, but he came home and he didn't feel good on the plane. Got off the plane, went to the hospital, promptly infected all of the hospital workers. They promptly infected their families. And I happened to be in South Korea at the time, and over 17,000 people were quarantined. But they stopped it quickly because they knew how to do this. Masks, social distancing, and again, this was all due to one super spreader. And I will say these numbers are actually fairly inaccurate because the symptoms were so similar to colds and flu that they really feel these were underreported back when these, SARS and MERS hit. And here on the bottom, you can see the vectors for these diseases. For SARS, we have the palm civet, and then the bat, and then for MERS, it's the camel and the bat. And we're pretty sure that, although it's not been proven yet, it's probably a bat that caused the SARS-CoV-2. Oops, sorry. So now we find ourselves in 2019, and suddenly we have a major outbreak that escalated very, very rapidly. And part of the problem with this was that it was highly contagious, much more so than the previous coronaviruses. And unfortunately, our immune systems had never seen anything like this. Our immune system fought back very hard. That caused this cytokine storm that we hear about, the massive inflammation and organ damage. And that was really part of the reason that suddenly the hospitals were just flooded with people, because it came on so quickly. And in addition, people who have underlying conditions such as asthma and diabetes, like me, were at a much, much higher risk of the severe complications and death. And as you know, if we haven't passed it already, I think we're at 5 million worldwide. And that's just unacceptable. And particularly for someone who works in the antiviral field, that is very, very frustrating for us. And the problem is now we see the development of the variants, which is a resistance mechanism. And that's fortunately something our compounds can overcome. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So how do we fight viruses? I know you guys have probably become very aware over the past 2 years of all sorts of things that could be tried. Bleach, UV light, antibiotics, antiparasitic drugs, but that's not how, it doesn't work that way. You can't kill a virus with those types of drugs. Vaccines are critical, but that's prevention. It doesn't kill the virus. And monoclonal antibodies have been used, and those are they have been useful, but there's a problem because they have to be given in a hospital. And so that limits their use, particularly in rural areas and challenged nations. Now, yes, there have been successful use of steroids, and they are important as well because they help fight that inflammation. But again, they're not stopping the growth of the virus. And the best way to kill a virus is to hit it hard with direct-acting antiviral drugs. Now, and those we know are small molecules that are pills that we can take. They can be distributed worldwide. They can be stockpiled. So when we think about this, why do we want to use small molecules? Well, as I said, the vaccines don't kill the virus, and monoclonal antibodies have to be administered in the hospital. But more importantly, we have to be able to treat those early stage of the disease. The people who are just, instantly or are immediately affected, maybe not severely. And so that's about 80% of the population that doesn't need to go to a hospital. And so if we can treat them at home, that's going to cut down on that massive influx of people showing up to a hospital. And we also need to have treatments available for people who are immunocompromised, or those who cannot produce a very strong immune response after vaccination. And the other point too is that by using small molecules, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, we can effectively fight those variants, and that's really critical. And I think also very important to be able to use these prophylactically for people who are in high-risk situations where they're going to be exposed to the virus, constantly. So when we as antiviral, professionals think about this, there are a number of ways to go about treating a virus. You can do what's known as one drug, one bug, where we're really focused on one disease and one drug to treat just that disease. We can also do virus targeted, so where you're looking at more broad spectrum, where we're hitting either many in the same family or in related families. But again, one drug to hit sort of this broad spectrum of different viruses. And then also you can target the host. That's a little more risky because of course you don't want to, that can cause toxicity because you're talking about shutting down pathways that are really important for your well-being. And so that's not necessarily the best way to go. But many of you, I'm sure, are very aware of President Biden's and NIH's investment in developing small molecule broad spectrum inhibitors that have just hit last week, actually. And that they put in $3 billion for this. But that's not enough. And we need to do this, as the ambassador said, this has to be done globally. We have to fight this globally. And that means we need everybody putting in money, everybody working together. So when we think about how virus replicates, there are a number of different places. There's a pathway here. We have first attachment, then entry, then it gets into the cell, and you undergo uncoding, translation, replication, and then it releases more viruses. Basically it's hijacking your cells and replicating. And so what you want to be able to do, is to, this thing does not like there we go, stop, stop. Okay, I'm just gonna do this. That's a lot easier, there we go. So there's a lot of different spots in that viral replication pathway where we can target to shut this down. We can target the spike proteins in the beginning to keep it from attaching. We can try to, inhibit by using fusion or entry inhibitors. Once it gets in, we can use viral polymerase inhibitors, for example, remdesivir. Sure, everybody's heard about remdesivir. And we can also shut down with protease inhibitors as well. There's a lot of different potential targets within the sorry. My allergies have been killing me this last week. Oh, thank you. And so, but that seems like it's easy. Oh, we can just sort of pick one of these and shut it down. Well, that's not really how it works. Unfortunately, there are many challenges. It's not always easy to identify how a molecule works. You may see activity, but you don't necessarily know its mechanism of action. So that takes a lot of study and a lot of manipulation of the of the drug, the compounds. And you also are always worried about toxicity. If you're hitting both the viral polymerase and the human polymerase, that's going to be problematic. And again, with other things. And of course, administration, we know, unfortunately, remdesivir has to be also given in the hospital. And so that makes it less than usable for many of the population. And, the other thing too is I don't think people are really aware of how long and how tedious it is to do drug design. And while we saw great fast action with the vaccines, in terms of drugs, it's a little bit different. You can see here, this is the typical pathway for drug development. First you're looking to find your target. What is it I'm going to try to stop? Well, in our case, it's viruses, right? Then you're going to screen lots of compounds, either library or people like us that are slaving away, well, my grad students anyway, slaving away in the laboratory. And then you start to refine it. You're basically doing a structure activity relationship study where you're making these compounds, testing them, and then seeing the best ones, improving those leads. And this is an iterative process that just keeps going back and forth until you get the best one that you can go forward with. Well, then you get into your in vitro studies, then into animals, and then preclinical, and then finally into clinical. Well, as you can see here, you start with perhaps maybe 15,000 compounds, and then you go through this iterative process, and by the time you get to preclinical, you're maybe down to about 500. Then you get 10 that go into the clinic. They may or may not make it through, and at the end, it's probably maybe one drug that gets FDA approved. And that typically takes 12 to 15 years and $2.6 billion. And a lot of manpower and people and, students and people we're training and all sorts of people trying to work together. Because this is, yes.
I was wondering, you said something about, you said with 15,000 compounds, you just pick them at random or you have some targets? You say this might work and that might work.
You're really looking to see, you're screening these in a library screen. So you're doing high throughput screening with maybe, 1,000 compounds going through a machine. And you're looking to see, first of all, do they have activity against the virus? Then when you figure out that they do have activity, you pick those out. And then you're looking to see what their mechanism is, how they're working, and how you can improve that activity. Because again, you have to test for toxicity, you have to test for oral bioavailability, because you want to be able to give this as a pill. And so this is one of the reasons I think people don't understand the cost of why the cost of drugs is so high. It's because you're spending that much time to hopefully get one compound. The research and development pathway is just incredibly long and expensive. Well, in that regard, I think one of the top classes of compounds that's on the market are nucleosides. Now, granted, I'm a little biased because that's what I've spent 30-some years working on is nucleosides. And as Johnny said, I also was president of the Nucleoside Society. But on the other hand, they are the drugs that you see in the clinic. They are what you're using, what you're being administered. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with AZT. For HIV, we have all sorts of other different types of nucleosides, and you can see their structures are very different. Tenofovir is one of the main components in all of the HIV combination drugs today. Sabosvir is the drug that cured hepatitis C. And then we also have activity against cancer for nucleosides. And one of the reasons that nucleosides are such a good class of drug is because they resemble the natural nucleosides in your body, in your DNA, adenosine, guanosine, and so on. And so when you make a structural change to that nucleoside scaffold, that gives you the opportunity to sort of muck up the works in terms of these replication pathways. And that's really important because you want to have something that looks enough like the natural nucleoside to get taken up and used as a building block, for example, in your DNA. But then there's something going on with it on that structure that keeps it from the pathway from going forward. Now, the other problem that we face in terms of being a medicinal chemist is the development of resistance on these variants. And we all know that the Delta variant is now front and center and causing a lot of problems for everybody. So there's an answer to that. And that's the use of drug cocktails, combination therapies. So in other words, taking, multiple drugs and using them in combinations to kill that virus at different steps. So here you can see 3 examples of HIV drug combinations. Truvada has 2 drugs in it in that one pill. Biktarvy has 3. And the last one has 4. That's a relatively new one, Genovia. And what happens is those combinations exponentially increase your ability to stop the development of resistance. And that's really critical because if you don't kill as much of the virus as possible, it starts to mutate and that causes problems. And we're in the midst of that now. And so here are some of the benefits that you can see for using combination therapies. And you can target, for example, different viral targets. So different steps in that replication pathway with different drugs. And then you can also target a viral protein or a host protein together with different types of drugs. And the benefits there is, number one, you're going to see lower side effects. You're going to have lower dosages. You're probably going to have synergistic activity, so better activity than if you just gave the 2 drugs by themselves. And also, again, that reduced potential for developing resistance, and that's really critical. So some of the nucleosides that are currently being studied against COVID-2, you can see here, obviously remdesivir, everyone knows that. Another one that's been in the news in the last week or 2 is molnupiravir. And another one, AT527 from Atea Pharmaceuticals, and favipiravir, which actually doesn't start off as a nucleoside, starts off as the nucleobase, and then intracellularly gets turned into the nucleoside and nucleotide. And in addition, are fleximers. So we have been working on this scaffold, the fleximer scaffold, where we have split that purine base into two pieces, but kept it connected for, oh God, decades. Don't laugh. He knows because he's been there with me. And, you know, we have spent so much time working on this. And it wasn't until a few years ago when we really just hit the jackpot with these against a number of different viruses: Ebola, Marburg, dengue, Zika, yellow fever, tick-borne encephalitis, SARS, MERS, and now COVID-2. And so this is, as a reporter said to me the other day, so how does it feel to be reach the pinnacle of your career at 63? I'm like, oh, is it over now? I mean, is the rest downhill? I hope not. So anyway, like I said, we've spent a lot of time working on this, and we are very excited. We have compounds that are in infecting animals right now. And unfortunately, I don't have time to talk to you about those today, but just to point out that we are working very hard on hopefully getting these to market. We have a number of actually 4 different biotech companies that are interested in potentially licensing our compounds. So fingers crossed, we'll see what happens. Now, there are a couple other direct-acting antivirals that are in the pipeline. The Pfizer drug targets the viral protease, which is another important piece in that pathway. And then also, we see some of these hepatitis C drugs, sabosavir, used in combination with velpatasvir. That combination actually targets several steps. And they've been looking into this for use against COVID-2 as well. And that's another important aspect, is a lot of drugs are being looked at, other antivirals, direct-acting antivirals are being looked at for repurposing. And that's, important because that also cuts down that time. And that actually sort of leads me to, my take-home messages that I want you guys to think about. The lessons learned. I mean, we weren't prepared. That's the bottom line. And we could have been. Personal story. In 2015, I had an unbelievable team assembled who were working on MERS and SARS, and we had fantastic activity against those viruses. And it went to a certain federal funding agency whose name shall go unsaid. And the 2 of the reviewers liked it, but the 3rd reviewer said, well, these two outbreaks, SARS and MERS, they were really small, and they were, they didn't affect the United States, so why should we invest money in this? Well, if they had perhaps funded our grant, we would already have that compound ready to go when this outbreak occurred. And that, to me, is really heartbreaking. But we're on some new ones that are probably very, very important. But I think, again, like I said in the beginning, I think governments across the world have to, we have to invest in coming up with something that can be ready for that next virus, that, disease X that we know is waiting. There are hundreds of coronaviruses that are circulating among animals. And it's not just coronaviruses. And, these zoonotic diseases that can jump from animal to, to human, they're all over there. We also have a swine flu outbreak in Africa right now, and we have to find something. And the nice thing is, some of these viral targets are very conserved across different diseases. And that's the way to go about doing this, is to find that commonality and then make that small molecule inhibitor. And so, fortunately, NIH has invested in this big time with their antiviral drug discovery centers for pathogens of pandemic concern. The due date was last Friday. I'm very proud to say I was asked to be on 3 of them. Together, those 3 grants total $325 million. And if funded, my part would be $11 million. I don't even know how to begin to think about spending that, but we will try. But again, I think the bottom line is we have to, in looking forward, we have to be proactive rather than reactive. We just cannot be behind the ball again. We have to be ready to go. So in closing, as we talked about, it's important for collaborations. And I first met Janusz back in 2000 actually, when I was at Georgia Tech and he was there as a Fulbright scholar. And we've since published together. I was actually featured on national Slovenian TV 2 years ago, I think it was, when the new NMR Center was dedicated. So I was very proud of that, even though I couldn't understand a word of the newscast. And then this was also Janusz and I at one of the ANA conferences, to which I've been to several. And just some pictures of good memories and nice places that I've visited in Slovenia. This is looking out of my favorite hotel room onto the castle, and of course the dragons on the bridge. And because we're very into dragons. And in fact, our dog, who is there with Rokita, who's a Spanish Mastiff, is named Drogon. And for those of you who are Game of Thrones people, you'll recognize that that's the biggest dragon. So, and there he is having a scientific discussion with Janusz. And Mike and I, just in the other side of this room, in front of that display. And then here's some more good times with some of our other collaborators and colleagues from Japan. So this is very global. You notice there's a theme here too, food and wine. Excellent Slovenian wine. I absolutely love it. That was the one at the farmhouse. I can't remember, very close to the Croatian border. Yeah. And then of course, to close, I just want to thank the ambassador and Bastian and of course Janusz for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today about this really important problem, and also to hopefully continue our collaborations. And this was from dinner last night. So anyway, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Wonderful start. Some question, somebody? Please, go. Otherwise, I'll have a question.
If these antiviral drugs take off and are successful, will that make vaccine? I mean,
No, you still want the vaccine because you want to prevent it. But you have to have an option for people who can't necessarily get the vaccine.
there's
You
no
know.
question whether what
Yeah.
long-term effects are of the vaccine, or what long-term effects of these drugs. Do you disagree, or?
Well, that's the thing. It's probably going to be a short course of treatment. But then again, if you have it readily available, just like we do like Tamiflu, you get sick, you take Tamiflu, you stop taking it a few weeks later.
You would require the immunity while you're having the treatment, and that would. So
But
you would avoid
The
having.
immunity
the
may
vaccine.
wane, it's just like what we deal with the flu every year, right? There's new variants, right, but it's the same thing. Or if you get a different type of a viral infection, you take a course of antiviral drugs for, maybe 2 weeks or something. Herpes viruses, if you get a cold sore, you take the drug for that for, I think, 5 days, and then it goes away, but then it may come back because it lays dormant in your body. So you still need to have those drugs.
Kathy, for the cocktail of a drug, do you have to make sure they have synergistic effect? Do they actually help each other, or they can just be each acting independently?
They can act independently, but it's always great if you can get that synergy. And that's what you're really hoping for, because with synergy, you're getting an added benefit. So it's not just additive, 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 5. And so you're going to get more bang for your buck if you can do it synergistically, because that's also what will help you cut down on those dosages and also side effects, because you're not necessarily giving such a large dose. If you can cut it down because they're helping each other.
And that's what also helps resistance?
Yes.
Just at lower.
Right, because you exponentially cut down that chances of, because you're killing it at several different points. So not much is escaping, right? You never can kill 100%. So if you do it at one step, you go on to the next step and you kill hopefully what got through. And if not, maybe the third step, So, yeah.
Please.
What about Prodrugs?
Oh, no, Mike, that's Anita. Please go ahead. No, go
You
ahead.
can ask me that at home.
Well, traveling
Yeah.
far, right?
I want to thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. And congratulations on the grants that you received.
Well, I haven't gotten them yet. They still have to get reviewed.
Congratulations again. What I was interested to hear more is, you're talking about this cooperation with Slovenia, and we're very glad that you met Janis and established this wonderful cooperation, which benefits the both countries. I want to ask you, how do you usually initiate this cooperation? With Janis, it was more of a coincidence. How do you usually establish this international cooperation with other institutes?
Oh, it's really amazing. All of us go to similar meetings, and actually, I know almost everybody here that's speaking. So, we meet at meetings, and you see other people's science, and you go, oh, I'd really like, could you test my compounds? And so, for example, these AVID grants that went in, these are center grants. They have from one of those that I'm on has 10 different institutions, 5 different countries, 27 different researchers. And it's really critical, you had to have an industry partner. So it can't just be academics, it also has to be industry involved as well, because that's part of the problem. It's hard for academics to get a drug to market. You've got to have a lot of money to do clinical trials. And that's where the industrial partner comes in and takes you over that finish line to get you to the clinic. So.
Oh, please go ahead.
I don't know enough about it to know whether this is a new profession or not, but what about veterinary applications? Would you develop something for the human stuff? Is it close to being also useful in the veterinary application?
It can. It can be, but it also depends on the animal. Some animals have very similar systems to ours and some don't. For example, the animal model for hepatitis B is actually the woodchuck, believe it or not. So, because their body, their biological processes with regards to hepatitis B is almost identical to humans. But on the other hand, when you're doing these studies, you're also doing them in animal testing as you go along. And so you may see something in those early animal tests to indicate that maybe it might be useful. So for example, remdesivir, it's not technically remdesivir, it is remdesivir, but it's without the prodrug, there you go, Mike, is that it doesn't have that protecting group on it. That Bayer nucleoside is actually used for feline COVID. And so, yes, you can, but you still have to prove everything. You can't just automatically give something that's meant for an animal to a human and vice versa. And this is what has happened with ivermectin, is that people have been taking horse doses and ending up in the hospital because it's not meant for a human. That huge dose is not meant for a human. And it's also a different formulation for a horse than it is for humans. So again, you have to know your doses and your animals, and you go through the testing the same. But if you see if you see it's working in the animal trials, you're obviously going to think about that in terms of potentially using it for veterinary use.
Is ivermectin accepted or?
No.
Does it work?
No. No. It's not a direct-acting antiviral. It's an anti-parasitic drug. It is used for parasitic diseases in humans, but also in animals. So.
Let's leave it there. We appreciate this wonderful discussion, but we have to move on. Let's thank Kathy.
And Amanda's going to use my hand.
So we have a smooth transition. So next speaker is Professor Amanda Brian Friedrich, who is from Detroit, I remember. Hopefully I will not say what comes on your slides. Yes, Kathy, like I said, if you publish or you go around, that's not tourism, right? Scientific tourism, but it's really a standard collaboration. Maybe you have a drink together in the evening. Sometimes it is as simple as that.
Yeah.
And that's actually how I knew Amanda, knowing of her work and then chatting to her like we did now. Right? So she is person of recognition, being a dean, dealing with all the pleasures and challenges that come at university. I don't want to frighten anybody. But she's also fellow of American Chemical Society. She served several important positions. She spent time in Europe, which is great, right? So this we all want, double wide traffic. So this is excellent. And second, she's also an antiviral person. So Amanda, when you're ready, feel free to start.
I will.
Yeah, swap
play. Go up here.
Yeah, yeah, it is. My allergies have been driving me crazy this week. It's the fall stuff. I know, I'm hoping. Andy, you want to win?
I have to find my presentation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm gonna go into the presentation mode, it might go back to. I can't see.
See, it's up at the top.
Yeah,
On the left.
You could swap those clothes there.
Yes, I can't see that.
You sort of have to, like, watch the mouse.
The mouse?
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
This is,
There you go. I know, it's hard. There we go. There we go. Well, now I have my glasses on, I can see everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today. I am very excited to have the opportunity to be in the Slovenian embassy today. I am a child of the world, so to say. I was born here in the United States, but I have spent my life traveling around to different places. So I actually got my PhD in Germany from the University of Heidelberg. And I did my postdoctoral studies at the University of Basel in Switzerland. So Europe is my second home. I have European Union American children because my kids are German and American. So being here today has a very personal feeling for me, as well as a wonderful scientific feeling for me. I have been doing nucleic acids research for quite a long time, but today I'm not going to talk to you about that. I have gone through my career and now am an academic administrator, which Steve asked me if he should give me condolences or congratulations to.
But as anyone knows, running anything is difficult. But this is an important part of why I do what I do. I love to bring people together, and I love to bring countries together. I do it at home every day. And I do it for students who come to the United States to work with me at Wayne State University. So I bring you greetings from Wayne State University, where I am the Dean of the Graduate School and Professor of Pharmaceutical Sciences. And I also bring you greetings from the American Chemical Society Division of Medicinal Chemistry, where I'm the chair-elect. So I get to spend a lot of time talking about medicinal chemistry, talking about the development of pharmaceutical agents and pharmaceutical intermediates and treating disease. And so today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about where do we go from here. We're talking a lot about thinking about diseases, but where are we going to go from here? And I'm going to talk to you about emerging and re-emerging pathogens. So we've talked a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about prevention and treatment, and I'm going to talk about the challenges, but never discuss challenges without some solutions. I'm going to throw up a case study, and then I am going to go through my acknowledgements. So what you see here is on the top is a banner from the Food and Drug Administration. That is the holy grail for a medicinal chemist. We want to make a new medicine that is going to treat people. We want to make ways to detect disease before it even gets anywhere. We want people to know when they're sick. And the Food and Drug Administration, of course, gives us the license to go into the body. So when I was thinking about this today, I said, oh, we need to look at what's actually going on in the world of emerging diseases. And I went to the World Health Organization, and you can see here in 2019, there are 3 diseases that are infectious diseases that are important around the world. The first one is lower respiratory infections. The second is neonatal conditions. And the third is diarrheal diseases. In the United States, we don't even think about the third one very much. But around the world, it is a major issue. And so I wanted to kind of draw your attention over here, let me move over here a little bit, to this chart, because I think it's really interesting to see here. These dark circles are for 2019. The open circles are for 2000. What I want you to notice here is lower respiratory infections. We're still at a point where we're challenged. But if you look down here at neonatal conditions in 2019, we're making progress. Down here for diarrheal diseases, we're making progress. But here is where we've been talking about today, a lot of things that have to do with respiratory disease. So I wanted to make sure that we took a look at that. So I decided to bring some color to my world and talk to you a little bit about what's really out there and what is it that we're worried about. So an emerging infectious disease, and you can see up there at the top, is an infectious disease that have newly appeared in a population or have existed or are rapidly increasing in incidence or geographic range. So we want to make sure we remember that. And they are classified by the National Institute of Infectious Diseases in categories A, B, and C. So they have a system here in the US to categorize this. You see some old ones on here. The oldest one you see on there, which one is it that you're thinking about? We don't even need to think about it anymore. Plague, smallpox, cholera. All 3 of those still show up around the world. Smallpox is re-emerging. We have to be worried about it. Cholera never went away. And plague didn't either. So we have to remember that in our worlds, we may not be seeing these, but what affects one part of the globe affects the entire globe because we are so connected with each other. You can see SARS is on there. I'm not going to talk about that very much because my wonderful colleague here talks a lot about COVID. But you see Zika. We heard about Zika. You notice there we have all these balls on the screen. Those are viruses. Those things that are elongated, those are bacteria. So we're talking about bacterial infections as well as viral infections as emerging infectious diseases. I'm going to talk about 2 other classes as well, so I want you to remember that. Remember West Nile? It didn't go away either. It's still there. Remember hepatitis A? If you had a baby went to get those shots, they got a hep vaccine, right? So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about, but they're emerging and re-emerging. Remember the definition. So we need to prevent And the colleague back here asked the question, if the small molecules, the pills, become important or they become realistic, do we get rid of the vaccine? And the answer would be no. Because one of the things that we have to remember, and this is controversial, but vaccines we can get people to take to never get sick. To never get sick. So we can have massive programs. But if you start talking about trying to get people to take pills, one of the things that I always had to teach when I was teaching medicinal chemistry to my students was about medication compliance. How many of you are on medications and you get up in the morning and you forget to take it? If you're on a regime for a virus and you forget to take it, or a bacteria, you may have to start all over again. So we do have some things that we really have to consider. So how else do we prevent? Well, here come those things that everybody acted like was new when COVID came. Washing your hands. Didn't your mama tell you to wash your hands? Mama told you to wash your hands all the time. It's still there with soap and water. And to cover your nose. Didn't your mama tell you not to sneeze on people? That is not new. This is what we always learn. The disinfection, okay. Yeah, we like to be clean. Cleanliness is important. But what disinfection means is not clear to the entire population. So even now when we're telling people to disinfect, we're not necessarily giving them enough information to know whether or not they're removing some of the things that we know are emerging. Avoid contact with sick people. Now I tell my baby is 10 years old, so she's still my baby. No, you can't go to so-and-so's house because they have a cold. Now I have to say they tested positive for COVID, so no, we're not going to have a play date there. But we've been doing that for a very long time. We protected our babies and we protected our elderly. All of us who have to go out and work, that's a little bit of a different story. So a lot of us go to work sick. Amen? Okay. Go to work sneezing at each other. I bet we won't do that as much anymore because we're learning from COVID. Don't drink or swim in contaminated water supplies. That's not something that we think about, but that is a problem around the world. And we always talk about water and clean water being so important. The last one, not eating and drinking food and beverages prepared by people who are sick. You go into the restaurant and you see, nowadays in the fancy restaurants, you can see the people cooking your food and then they do this. Do you want to eat that food? Because we're learning. So those are things that we've always known about. But these are things that we have to have heightened sensitivity to now in these days. Prevention in the form of vaccine. You can see here, Kathy did a great job of introducing us to vaccine and talking about different diseases, but Ebola, there is a vaccine for Ebola. You can see COVID, that one's the Moderna, actually, that you're looking at there. There's a vaccine for cholera, smallpox, dengue, and hepatitis A. There are other vaccines out there for some of the things that we probably know about. And so vaccination will be and will continue to be important. My university has a flu mandate, a flu vaccine mandate. We all have to get a flu shot. And there are still people who are very concerned about being told what to do with their body. And so that is something that we're going to have to deal with. How do we change that? That's going to be a key issue that we're going to have to deal with. So here are the treatments. And again, antivirals are the first one here. And those are anything that kills a virus or suppresses its ability to replicate. So is the virus still there? Yes. You still have it. You had the chickenpox, the virus is still there. You had shingles, the virus is still there. So don't forget those things, but we have to make sure that we are not able to actually continue to produce it. Antibiotics, of course. We know that when we have a bacterial infection, get a sinus infection like I have right now, you need some antibiotics? No. Right now, doctors are telling you no. Because why? The more antibiotics you take, the more antibiotic resistance is going to become a problem. So what do? You get some hot water and put it in your nose and make yourself feel better. But those are the kinds of alternatives we have to think about. Antifungals. Fungal infections can be deadly. And people don't usually think about that in that way. But if you think about it, any kind of infection that attacks the body can lead to different things like sepsis, and it can be fatal. So we have to think about those. And then there are the parasites, the parasitic infections, of course, and the one that should be top of mind is malaria. It is a very important one to remember because it impacts a great part of our globe. Okay, so 4 different categories there, things that we need to think about. So now what do we have as challenges? Now this is the part where, in the role that I play and all of the different things I do, I take liberty to use a soapbox to preach. So I'm going to preach to you today. What are some of the challenges? The first one, mistrust of science and medicine. And whose fault is it that the public does not trust science and medicine? I blame it on the scientists. And very often I get a lot of flack for that. But we are not the kind of people who usually can relate information to people who are not scientifically trained in a way that makes them feel good. We have to learn how to do that. Now, can we actually get to the point where we do it really well without the populace also coming and meeting us a little bit of the way and getting trained? No. We need people to have a basic understanding. But we, as the ones who have been given the opportunity, I'm not going to remember how to say your name. Say it out loud for me. Bastian? Yes. We talked last night about students in Slovenia getting a free education. They get their education paid for. They have the opportunities to learn so very much. The country has invested in those folks. Those folks have a responsibility to train and educate the populace. Because everybody cannot become a physician, everybody cannot become a scientist. But that becomes a part of it. So those of us who train, those of us who are in that line of work, we need to make sure that our young folks are learning how to communicate science to everyone. So that's an important part. It's not a US problem that people mistrust science, even though, we do everything big here in the United States. So we're really good at it. A lot of false information out there. If there's false information out there and you have people that you trust to translate for you, then a lot of that goes away. Past harm is a big deal. And this is one of the things I think that we don't talk about enough. Too many different groups of people have been used as experiments. We really need to start talking about the fact that that happened and that we don't agree with that anymore. Until we make that clear, there are still going to be groups of people who believe that they're an experiment. And that's how a lot of people feel right now, that we're giving an experimental drug to them, because we talk about not being fully approved by the FDA. Does the average Joe on the street know what that means? No. So we're using this language that just doesn't appeal to people, that people don't understand. So basically, in the future, we need to have a more informed public. We need to think about restorative justice in healthcare. And that is acknowledging harm, talking about what has been done, and saying out loud that we're not doing that anymore. The next one is new models for healthcare. There are models around the world that work really well. There are other models that don't work well. And when we're talking about cost, accessibility, all of those things, we have so many different things that we have to deal with. So that's the future there. Climate change. Whether you believe in climate change or not, I'm not here to talk about that. But one thing that I do know from looking at the scientific literature is that human beings are changing, animals are changing, insects are changing, vegetation is changing, precipitation is changing. I don't know where it's coming from, but I know it's changing. So if you see changes in the environment where you go and sit outside in the summertime and you get attacked by mosquitoes for 2 hours in the evening, then know that there's a prevalence of mosquitoes in your environment that wasn't there 3 years ago. Ask yourself where it came from. And mosquitoes transmit malaria and Zika. So we know these things can be important. Kathy talked about the bat. The bat is a part of our ecosystem. If things change for the bat, and the bat decides that you're going to become its food, then it's going to have an impact on you. So I put a question mark for climate change. I don't know what to do about climate change. It's not my field, not my area. I'm just hoping that there's someone here listening today who will start to think about it and start to think about how we're going to deal with these things. We have to get ourselves to understand more of how new pathogens emerge and how old ones reemerge. We've got to figure that out. Right now, we've got individual studies going on. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 scientists in here, and not all of us talk to each other. And we're doing research in different individual laboratories. We're creating all of this information, but we don't even realize sometimes that what I found out on Friday could be very helpful to Sarah on Tuesday. So we have a responsibility. Somebody's paying for all of this. Kathy talked about $325 million in grants, and then we put all of it in a drawer somewhere so that no one can get to it. So we need to actually find ways to make sure that we create the data, that the data is verified, and that we end up doing more global collaboration. And yes, it has to be governments, it has to be universities, it has to be companies, it's got to be everybody, because finding the treatment for disease and making sure that the human population can live as long as it can, healthy, that's the world's job. That's what we have to do. Drug resistance is important too. And so this is a key challenge that we're going to have to deal with. If we don't actually create the drugs, we can't treat disease. Disease then just keeps going, and then every person that is going to it has an opportunity to change. And when it changes, the drugs don't treat it anymore. So we really have to be cautious about that. So we need rapid and coordinated responses. Those are two things that globally we don't know how to do. And I don't know why. We seem to know how to do that in other things. Maybe we should learn from the people who traffic drugs all over the world. They seem to know how to do it, right? I don't know. That's just a thought. But we need to find a way to have rapid and coordinated responses. And my passion, we've got to train people. We've got to make sure that the best and brightest of our communities are in those universities learning how to be the scientist that's going to treat cancer, that's going to find a new cure for disease. We need to put money into that. Folks can't go to college and universities without money, without financing. The professors need to be paid. So there needs to be some support there. How much time do I have? Okay, excellent. So I'm going to use hepatitis C as a case study kind of sorts to talk to you about really what we should be thinking about down the road. I just explained the challenges. So what is hepatitis C? Anything that says hepatitis is an inflammation of the liver. This one is, of course, caused by the hepatitis C virus. It can be acute or it can be chronic. You know that basically it's one of the main reasons for liver transplant globally. Liver transplant is expensive. So actually finding cures for hepatitis C is an important thing to take some of the burden off of the healthcare system. It's bloodborne, and most infections occur through exposure to blood from unsafe injection practices. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Unsafe healthcare, unscreened blood transfusions, injection drug use, and sexual practices that lead to exposure to blood. There are 3 things on there that are connected. Sexual practices, injection drug use, and unsafe injection practices. We have a problem with drug use globally. When people use drugs, they spread hepatitis C. So we need to think about the fact that we have a social problem that is also contributing to disease. So our epidemiologists need to really think about this so that we can figure out how to treat diseases, to prevent diseases. Globally, 58 million people have chronic hepatitis C virus infection. And 1.5 million new infections occur each year. That's globally, okay? The World Health Organization estimated in 2019 that approximately 209,000 people died from hepatitis C. Is that a lot of people? It's not. So, question, if we were looking at drug development And we get to a point where most people don't have the infection anymore, then it doesn't become an economic driver for the companies. So we have to think about that too. There's a lot involved in this in treating disease. Antiviral medications can cure more than 95% of persons with hepatitis C infection. That is incredible. But you've got to get the treatment to the folks who need it. And you see here that access to diagnosis and treatment is low. If you've gone to the doctor within the last year or so, hepatitis C evaluation is a part of your normal physical examination in the United States. So people are being screened for hepatitis C without knowing it. That's something you can talk to your doctor about. And there's no vaccine for hepatitis C. So what do? You see here, over here is a listing of many different drugs that came to market in a very short time frame, to be perfectly honest. So you can see over there, there's a timeline. I'm not going to go through all of that, but you can see the abbreviations there, SOF, LDV, those are the new drugs. So the first ones that you start to see are in the 2000s, in 2011. So you can see here that we started creating these drugs. And this was that major medicinal chemistry machine that Kathy showed you. We found out what we needed to target. We found out what kinds of drugs worked, and we went to work and figured it out. Then we started dealing with resistance, and people started putting drugs together. So we got cocktails and all of that kind of stuff. So we learned a lot. And now some of those drugs, of course, are being used for COVID. So this was an important discovery. Now, who was involved in the United States? All of these entities. All of these entities. And you'll notice here that the U.S. National Cancer Institute actually was the first one to start it. And that's at the top for that reason. And then you see all of these different companies that contributed to the development. They were trying to increase their bottom line. They were creating these new drugs. It costs in the United States right now between $54,000 and $95,000 to get the 8-week treatment for hepatitis C. How much does it cost in India? $1,000. Why? The technology was developed, somebody paid for it, the knowledge is out there, and now other people can make it and make it cheaper. I'm not going to talk about the justice in that. That's up for you to decide. I'm just giving you the information. So you can see availability here is still a problem. It remains too limited. This is from the World Health Organization. They talk about, again, how many people are actually infected, 15.2 million new diagnoses. And you can see treatment here is from direct-acting antivirals that Kathy talked about. And basically, they talk about how many people have been treated who have the infection. So that's an important piece of information. Drug resistance is becoming an important issue here. There are 7 distinct HCV genotypes, and there are 67 subtypes. So this is that situation where it moves from person to person and changes very often when it does that. So what are we going to do? That's the question. What are we going to do? What is the best attack for us? I don't know. I didn't come to give you the answer to that. I came to give you some things to think about. So I'm super excited to be here. I don't think you guys can tell just how excited I am. I feel like I'm in somebody's house. I feel like I'm in your home. So I wanted to thank Ambassador Tony Kaiser for his wonderful invitation to have us here. I feel like now I'm jealous of Kathy because I've never been to Slovenia, so I'm going to figure out how that works.
I'll bring her with me.
Okay.
I wanted to thank Mr. Bastian, who was the one who helped to organize everything for us to be here and who has given me a wonderful insight into his country. Thank you very much for that. Giannis, thank you very much for having me here. And of course, I have to thank Kathy because I don't think you guys would have known that I should come here if she hadn't said something. So that's what she always says. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was different insight, and I think it's perfect. I might say later, because one thing I was trying to get somebody from ethics side that we heard so much, but she did it wonderfully. So I'm double happy and grateful to you. I'm sure there will still go.
Well, coming from Johns Hopkins, you really hit home when you talked about the idea of certain people wouldn't trust us, so they've been experimented on.
Right.
And you said that you can tell them, well, we have to tell them we don't do that anymore.
Right.
There has to be better. How do you actually convince them? Because that's what clearly hasn't happened yet. I mean, you can say that, we can say that all we want. Any ideas?
I do have ideas. It's about the honesty. You have to actually tell the people what you've done.
To admit to what has been done.
Admit to what you did. Because
Hopkins is still working on it.
Exactly. Because until you admit to what you've done, people aren't going to believe you when you say you're not.
Isn't that only one part of the story? Admit mistake, and then we go on. But scientists, we are so careful about our statement, and until you're undoubtedly proven, which is hard. Like she had a wonderful example, it's a drug.
Right.
You don't know exactly how it works, then you have problem, right?
Right.
And that's how do we convey that?
Mm.
That's actually working hard, but there's no final answer yet.
It's the same kind of thing. So just telling people a lot about what you've done and why it failed. And that's about communicating too. We have to learn how to communicate to the public that yes, the reason why we changed what we said from 1 week to the next is not because we were lying to you, but the science taught us more. And so we really have to learn to talk about it. We're not perfect.
But how do you silence all those lawyers that are just waiting for you to say the wrong thing? Sorry, you don't need to
Not
answer.
my field.
I know, you don't need to answer, but some other question or thought? Please, honey.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that both you and Professor Katie presented this in such a way that even us, who are not experts, understand this and find it really extremely interesting. You put a few elements that are very important. So besides science, funding is also very important. Cooperation with other colleagues, which can contribute to the findings of other scientists. But you also mentioned communication and the way that scientists have to communicate with the public, which in fact is the same problem we also have diplomats when we are dealing with our issues and how to translate them or put them, present in such a way that everybody understands. So my question would be, are there any courses that are offered or any initiatives in this regard so that the scientists would be at least more aware of this problem that you pointed out, that all scientists are, and how to solve this problem?
You know, it's very interesting. One of the things that there are a few things I can think of, but one of them is really important. These conferences that we attend together, we go into our conferences and we talk to each other. We understand each other, not realizing that we're not speaking everybody else's language. So we need to bring that kind of information to our conferences to help scientists learn how to communicate. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show MASH. You guys ever remember seeing MASH? So Alan Alda, the physician who played Hawkeye, has his own, is it an academy or an institute to teach scientists to communicate to the public. And he does a fantastic job. Of course, it's pricey to have people do it. But for those people who have the audience, they really do need to actually do it. Because one of the things he did, you know, he sounded like a doctor on MASH. He's not one. So he kind of understands where that's going from. So that is one institute. There are several others out there, but that's the most famous one that I know about.
Okay, I think I would suggest we go on. Amanda, this was fantastic. I'm sure we could chat more during coffee, but let's have some time for coffee, right? Okay, and will this gonna work? What?
No, this is fine. So let me just see that. Oh, yeah, okay.
So we are at the third speaker, that's before the break. This was Steve Rokita, my friend for years. Unfortunately, COVID was a side effect. We couldn't make him come to Slovenia.
I almost had my first opportunity to visit your wonderful company, but then COVID took over.
from Hopkins University, as you see. So basically, I don't know. He's always admiring me, going all the way from synthetic chemistry. So you have a challenge now, right, to present this, and then all the way how this works with enzymes. So it's really amazingly broad spectrum. So Steve, I don't want to spend another minute.
I hope I'm not the poster child of not being able to communicate, because this is, you heard two very broad talks, very interesting talks, and I'm going to bring you into the weeds. And you don't need to understand everything. You don't even need to appreciate all the aspects, but I want to show you a little bit of the process of how something that might not be directed to antiviral or health or malaria, that I will hopefully touch on in a second at the very end, still can come out of basic research. And so I said, we do this because, we have joys and surprises. I'm going to give you one of each at least. All right, so let's see. So you hear the term basic and applied research. So I come from very much the basic side of research, but there's a continuum. If you're interested in applied research, your primary motivation is solving an issue, a particular, you don't care how you do it necessarily, but there's an issue you want to go over. And basic research, I didn't actually have a good title. I actually Googled it to look up, well, what do other people call basic research? And let me go the other way. And what I found was, it's actually, that information, you're giving knowledge to the world that might not necessarily have particular use now, but as I show it, but there could be, you never know what might come out of it, when it might be useful. And I will tell you right now, someone in the world is doing some research that has nothing to do with viruses. But that research, that information, will ultimately help some cure or somebody else who is on the way to making a discovery to a cure for that. I mean, you never know how the lines are going to be drawn. Both that basic and applied research can be curiosity driven. So sometimes people are applied research, all you care is about what you do, but it's still curious. You're there because you are curious about how something works. And so I'm going to tell you a story today. It was really curiosity driven, and I am going to get in the weeds. I'm going to show you things that you probably want to see, but bear with me. And so the curiosity I have is something that you could say is pretty mundane. It's halogens or halides, and you all know about them a little bit. Fluoride is put in our drinking water to strengthen our teeth. Chloride, well, I really like the combination of sodium and chloride, and that makes me addicted to potato chips. So that's one thing. Chloride is most important in neural signaling. Bromides, you could, the old-fashioned way of a sedative and going to sleep was a bromide. I'm going to talk more about iodide, so I'll leave it at that. And then there's combinations of halogens with organic compounds, and they get a lot of press. You often hear in the news about all the horrible people in the chemical industry who, the industry is making all these halogenated compounds. And yeah, we do make a lot, but let me just mention that there's also biology and geology also contributes as well a lot to organic halides. And many of them will get degraded by microbes, and so that's good. And if you've heard recently, there's been a lot of talk about the persistent compounds,
Perfluoride?
Yeah, perfluorides, but I think that what they named it forever compounds is what the press is calling them. And those are these polyfluorinated compounds, and unfortunately, there's no microbes known to digest them, so they do sit in the environment forever, much like plastics these days, right? And so, but let me give you a couple of examples of various halogenated compounds. These are natural compounds. So fluoroacetate is a compound that's actually made in some plants in Australia, and it's a potent neurotoxin. In fact, it's used in the Midwest here as a pesticide for animals of prey. It would come in and eat up sheep and things like that. We've been talking about antibiotics. Here's chloramphenicol. It's a chlorinated compound. There's a lot of marine natural products from various organisms. I'm just showing you some brominated phenols. And then there's thyroxine right here. And you might not realize that we make in our bodies halogenated compound as well, a very important one. And this is derived from tyrosines and 4 iodides. And that's, the thyroxine is a hormone we make in our thyroid. And
isn't sucralose also chlorinated compound?
it could be, I don't know.
It is.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So Thyroxine is important for all of us. For everybody I see in the audience of our age, it's very important to regulate our general metabolism. Too much, too little, our daily metabolism will be messed up. But it's also incredibly important in a neonatal development for the brain and neural growth. And so to make this is really critical for our health. It's iodine is a micronutrient. We get small amounts in our diet. Luckily, we only need small amounts. But because there's little in most of our environments, we have two mechanisms to use it very efficiently. And one is a protein that transports iodine and keeps it in thyroid. So there's much more iodine in our thyroid than in the rest of our body. And so if you've ever had iodide thyroid scan, you could put a Geiger counter, and if you're exposed to radioactive iodine, it'll all go into your thyroid, better or worse. And then there's also this other enzyme that salvages iodine, and that's going to be really the topic of today. It's a critical problem. The World Health Organization said about 1.2 billion people do not get sufficient amount of iodine to make the thyroxine that we need for our metabolism. And finally, this is now an old quote from Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times, who said the real problem isn't so much the daily issues, but it's those things, if we don't have enough iodine in the diet when kids are being developed, that they have permanent loss of some brain function. And so that's really important. So what does the enzyme we're going to talk about do? This is called iodotyrosine deiodinase. As I mentioned, it's a salvage pathway. Our body makes thyroxine through iodine, a large protein. And then the protein is degraded. And for every one thyroxine that's made, there's also about 7 mono or diiodotyrosines. And if those persisted in our body, we'd excrete them out and we'd lose that valuable iodine. But this enzyme we're talking about is able to cleave the carbon-iodine bond, recycle, and can use iodine again. And so this was first discovered when people were starting to look at the organic basis for thyroid diseases. Mutation or destruction of this gene can cause thyroid problems, although it's only responsible for a minuscule amount of thyroid disease. So that's the background. Why did I get into this? Okay, it's really a nerdy kind of thing. I'm very interested in the vitamin, the riboflavin, and how it works. Riboflavin is used in our body to do a lot, to promote many different metabolic processes. But one thing it was not associated with is this reductive dehalogenation, the cleavage of the carbon-iodine bond. And so here's a picture of the molecular structure of riboflavin in the reduced state and the oxidized state. So it can transfer electrons to help cleave and release iodine. So we were interested, as I said, it was an intellectual curiosity. A lot was known about this vitamin, but no one had ever associated with this type of reaction. So we're going to be able to expand the knowledge of what this vitamin does for us. We're also interested in, if this is such an unusual reaction, where did it come from? If iodide is needed for all organisms that need to use thyroxine, and that's basically vertebrates. So how did it pop up? Where did it come from? And finally, we'll get to that last bit a little bit at the end. So I'm going to give you a pictorial diagram, because what's the process? We talked a little bit about how long it takes to do drug development, and that takes a myriad of people. So let me tell you what a small lab like mine does over time. And so I was interested in this enzyme I read about in the literature when I was in graduate school. Many years later, I won't tell you how many, but many years later in 2000, I finally had to convince a graduate student to start working on this problem. And back then, you had to do things the old-fashioned way. This is an enzyme that's in the thyroid gland. And so we would get pig thyroids, and some of you can see, we would grind up and chop up pig thyroids and start to extract and fractionate the protein, because we needed it to do our studies. Almost 10 years later, we could make it in quantities sufficient to crystallize it and get a crystal structure. I'll talk to you a little bit about that. That really opened up the door for so much. And from there, we found out, and we went in the genome database, and we found that the enzyme's not just in vertebrates like man and mice and fish, but it's also in flies, and these are thermophilic enzymes that you didn't know. So all kinds of different organisms, and that brought up a whole new question that we'll get to. And ultimately, I'm going to show you some information where we started looking in Drosophila, which no one knew needed iodide, and why would they have this enzyme? And it turns out it's very important for fertility. And this is a stained image of the testes, and I'll get to that at the video. So, but let me go, I'm gonna take you into the weeds right now and where we got started. If nothing else, just to show you kind of, you can go from the weeds up much higher later. So we were interested in how it works. And this is after many years of data gathering, we were able to put together a scheme of really what happens to go from our starting material with the iodide here to having the iodide lost. And it's a series of addition of a proton and then an electron, and then a release of the iodide, and then one more electron to our product. And I also thought I'd give you just a sense, well, how do we get that information? I'll just show you just a little bit of data. As I said, this is in the weeds compared to all of this. So we can look at the binding of substrates and tyrosine derivatives with this protein that catalyzes the reaction. And big numbers are low binding and small numbers are high binding. And we noticed there was a real break between, say, tyrosine and when you have a methyl tyrosine here, they don't bind. Really, we can't measure the binding, it's so poor. But you change one atom from a hydrogen to an iodide, and you get very, very tight binding. And you also see tight binding with the bromo, the chloro, the fluoro, and even nitro. And the correlation there was with the molecules that can stabilize that charged species bind, and the ones that don't aren't very good. So that's why we hypothesized that the enzyme starts here. So how do we get information for this? This would be a reactive intermediate. We'd never be able to detect it. It doesn't last long. But we can use synthetic chemistry to make an analog. So we can make a molecule as soon as you put a bond, alkyl group between the nitrogen on the nitrogen, you lock in that carbon double bond to oxygen that looks more like this intermediate. And when we can lock that in, you see very tight binding. And so it suggests that this along the catalytic pathway, we're stabilizing this more than we stabilize that molecule. So that gives us evidence for that. One of the great things about these proteins that use the riboflavin cofactor is it's yellow, which really makes purification easier and handling it easier. So they look yellow in their oxidized form, and you can track the various forms of this cofactor. So this is just showing you the absorbance of light versus wavelength. In the oxidized form, it has an absorbance here and it's yellow. When it's reduced, it's clear and has no absorbance. And when you generate that with one electron reduced semiquinone, you see a characteristic signature at absorbance of 600. So you can go from clear to blue to yellow. And that gave us evidence suggesting that this was indeed an important intermediate. All right. And so I think at this point, oh yes, one more thing. So we can go even deeper in the woods if you want. We can start saying, which is the hard step for this catalyst to promote? And we do that by, I think Kathy had mentioned structure-activity relationship. So if you have a range of structures, you can see how the system responds to those ranges and get an idea of what is important here. And so we could do that. We can make a series of compounds that can react, that can be processed by the enzyme. We're going to change this group we call R. And if it's a group that adds electron density to the system, it should stabilize protonation and destabilize electron transfer. And then we have an R group that kind of sucks the electron density away. You're going to make it harder to protonate, but easier to do the next step. So we can see which do we find. And when we went ahead and did this study, we see we use the term Kcat and Kcat over Km as catalytic efficiency. And you can see as we go to the groups down here, we see a nice trend, and we get higher activity for when R is electron dominating group, suggesting that this protonation is most important. In fact, by changing substrate, we have about an 80-fold, 40-fold increase in the turnover. And so we've also realized that this is the hard step for this enzyme. So this was the joy of being able to say, we don't know how this system works, and we can go through a lot of different experimental methods and say, we now think we know how it works. But structures, as you know, are really useful and important. And let me just show you the structure. So this is a cartoon of the structure of the protein. This is showing the polypeptide backbone. And the purple and the green are identical. They're two of the same units come and dimerize. And they bind that riboflavin identical subunit at that interface, and that's what is important. What we noticed in this first crystal structure was there's no data for a lot of the sequence near the active site. And that suggests that either that part of the protein is very floppy, or it has either it's moving or it has just multiple different conformations. When we did a co-crystal structure with the protein with substrate, and here you can see substrate stacked right over the riboflavin. Now it stabilizes this loop and this helix. And I'll show you that in a little bit more in the next slide. A different rendition. Now we're looking at the surface. The surface is what's common with and without the substrate binding. And when substrate binds, you now have the helix and the loop. And here's a blow up of that. So here is the riboflavin, here's our substrate, the outer tyrosine, and here's some side chains. These side chains are interacting with the charged part of the outer tyrosine. It seemed like those must be really critical. And so we can use that information we got from the crystal structure and now start to ask the question, where did this enzyme come from? Where did it arise? So what, of all the genes that are of related proteins, where do we all of a sudden see these? And so those are going to be our tool to do diagnosis and look at that. And we can start to look at the genes in kind of the same family. We did that. You don't need to look at all these, but you can see, we see a consistency of all of those sequences. But what was surprising, and here's our first surprise, it's not just mouse zebrafish, but it's also CNM bacteria, et cetera. So I can give you that we'll look at the tree of life here. And we were expecting to see this enzyme in all the chordata because they all generate thyroxine, they all need iodine. There is nothing known about insects needing iodine, certainly not in sea organisms like sea anemones. And we even found a gene that looks similar in bacteria. And so what do? Well, these days it's very inexpensive to synthesize the gene. So you just make the genes and you can get bacteria to express the protein. You ask, what does it do? And they were all deiodonases. So it seems like, where we thought it might arise from, all of a sudden it's everywhere. And the question is, what is this needed for iodide or what's it needed for? Let me just give you two examples. Let me start with what we thought, well, let's go to the extreme of bacteria. Bacteria. Just because you can see the ability to cleave that carbon-iodine bond doesn't mean, well, that's its function in life or that it even does it that well. So we went ahead and generated that protein and characterized it. And we can look at binding. I can just compare a human with the substrate iodotyrosine and the bacterial system. They both bind these numbers say they bind pretty well. Then we thought, well, bacteria, maybe they respond to halogenated compounds in the environment and they have a broad specificity. But if you simply remove this part of the substrate, here's an iodophenol, that could still be dehalogenated. It doesn't even bind very well. And as we've seen before, tyrosine doesn't bind well. We had crystal structures, and it's, a different kind of cartoon. We have cylinders instead of the corkscrews, but basically we can overlay the human enzyme and the bacterial enzyme. Almost identical. The only place where you see that little blue, that's the only place where there's a slight difference, but basically identical. And that we would have never. Look at catalysis, and we see, again, iodotyrosine is a very good substrate, has high numbers for this K-cat or Km. Iodophenol, kind of the generic substrate that might undergo dehalogenation, very poor. So it suggests what we had never predicted is even bacteria, for some reason, have this enzyme. Well, that's interesting. We don't know why, but we thought that's maybe less applied. So we thought, let's go to a system that might be more kind of relevant, and let's go back to the tree of life. And we originally picked honeybee, not for any particular reason other than expediency. It's not a great model system. Not a lot of people write about enzymes in honeybees. But that's not true with Drosophila. So the fruit fly is fantastic. If you have any interest, go to this flybase.org website, and you will know more than you could learn more than you'd ever want to. Information about the expression of every gene and every part of a Drosophila's life, even for genes they don't have any idea what they do. And for instance, they had no idea now we had information about a gene they didn't. They had already plotted out where it comes, where it is, but they had no idea what it does. And what they saw was it's expressed in the testes, just huge amount in the testes. Again, something we would have never predicted. It's not in humans. There's no worry about that. In it, testes. So that looked pretty interesting. It was certainly very different. In our body, it's primarily in the thyroid. So what's it doing? The first thing we did was, again, as biochemists, we go back and let's make the protein and then characterize it. And so I'll compare the human enzyme to the fly enzyme. And this is binding constant, is binding to the substrate. And we see it binds very tightly either tyrosine, it binds tightly to bromo, chloral, not so much to the fluorol. But they're almost, the Drosophila and the human are almost identical in properties. And that continues through with their ability to cleave a carbon halogen bond. I told you that they cleave the carbon iodine bond, but this enzyme also cleaves the carbon bromine, carbon chlorine bond. It cannot cleave the carbon fluorine bond. And again, the activities, if you just look at these numbers, the activities are pretty much the same. So what do I do? Well, number one is you find a collaborator who works on spermatogenesis in Drosophila, and two, you take a crash course, which is reading a few papers about spermatogenesis. I started again being in organic chemistry, but this is a fascinating opportunity. And so in spermatogenesis, you go through some cell cycles of, every cell has 2 sets of chromosomes, and when the cell divides, they continue to have 2 sets of chromosomes. If you remember your high school biology, sperm and eggs only have 1 set. So after a few divisions, they then switch over and start dividing, where each cell now only has 1 set of chromosomes. And ultimately, in the round cells, they're not what you think in the cartoons. It's not until the very end that they take this elongated sperm-like shape. And our enzyme peak expression is right in the transition. So it looked like it's got to be important. So we were able to delete the enzyme we did 2 things. We deleted the enzyme, we also damaged it so the protein would still be expressed, but it wouldn't have that activity. And that's what happens with fertility. So we can mate a male and a female. The female saves all the sperm, you get rid of the male, and then watch how many eggs can be laid over a period of days. So we can collect eggs and then watch how many viable adults are formed through like 1 to 5 days. And so for the wild type Drosophila, you can see that even after day 5, they're still laying eggs that produce maybe about 30 adults. When you have the deletion of the gene of interest, you can see that really does drop down significantly. So we are seeing a loss of fertility. And for the protein that's, say, compromised, it also is growing. So where do we go from there? Well, one is to look for phenotypes. And so you can stain the testes for various proteins and get an idea of the morphology. And I hope some of you can see that. Here's a testes from the fly. And we can stain the green as tubulin. It's a protein that is very important in structure. There's F-actin. You can hopefully see these little red dots there. We'll get to that in a second. And we've actually set it up so you can stain our protein as well. And that's primarily down here with some other little areas. You can see that it's very much localized. All right, so what happens when you delete our enzyme to the morphology? Well, they said the very last step is elongating the sperm. And so there are these protein actin will assemble right near the nucleus and act on a circular squeegee. It just basically squeezes out all the rest of the cell, gets rid of it, so you have the tail. And here's a picture you can see of these actin cones for a wild type, normal, healthy fly. And here's what it looks like when you have the deletion of our dehalogenase. And you can see that the actin is still aggregating, but it's misassembled. And that suggests for a reason why you might have problems with fertility. So what we still don't know is what the substrate might be of the protein. And so we don't know that it actually works in iodide. There's nothing in the literature that suggests iodide is important. So one of my brave students just took a bunch of these flies, you grind them up, and you start to fractionate. And then you can do column separation and look for mass signals. And what do we see? When we looked at the male wild type, we saw no accumulation of a halotyrosine. But when they have the damaged or deleted enzyme, you now see accumulation of bromotyrosine. No iodotyrosine, no chlorotyrosine, just bromotyrosine. One would never have got no one would have looked, say, I think bromotyrosine is formed in Drosophila, let's go look for it. So you get this through circuitous ways. And so bromotyrosine is formed. And if you look at it, we can also divide up and let's look at the testes versus the rest of the body. And you see that about half the bromotyrosine is in the testes. So definitely where we kind of would expect it. So that brings up a really interesting question, and that is the lack of that protein, something about that protein causing fertility issues, or is it the fact that the protein is not there and bromotyrosine accumulates, and maybe it's just bromotyrosine? And that's a very easy thing to look for. Simply go through the fertility studies again, but this time pre-treat the male with bromotyrosines. The male grows up with exposure to bromotyrosine in the food, and then is mated with a female that's never seen bromotyrosine. And now you see, whether it's the wild type or the Drosophila with the mutation, you see dramatic drop in fertility. So it looks as if that enzyme is important to get rid of bromotyrosine. And so we can also ask, what about, does it recapitulate the morphological changes we saw? I already showed you this. Here's a wild type where you see these little red cones for the actin. Here is the deletion where bromotyrosine will generally be accumulating endogenously. And then if you take a wild type enzyme, Drosophila that has the active enzyme, but you've overwhelmed with bromotyrosine, you see the same disruption of those actins. So it really does look like that bromotyrosine then is causing the problem. So let me just wrap up a little bit. So our joy was be able to solve an issue of a mechanism. We can expand what we know about what riboflavin does. We were very surprised. We're not predicting that this enzyme would be so ubiquitous. And so we knew from before I started that this was important for conservation of our iodide. What is important, how is it important in bacteria? We still don't know that. How about something in Drosophila? Well, the bromotyrosine is generated endogenously. Again, we would never guess that. You could go to metabolomic studies and you don't find that, you don't look for it. But it turns out that you can make it, and then we've been looking at how it's degraded. So we're hypothesizing that perhaps it's made as a signaling agent. So thyroxine is iodinated to become a signaling agent, and the way we get rid of it is to deiodinate it. And maybe here's another system that brominates tyrosine and then removes bromotyrosine to start in stop state. So now the very last sentence I'll say, so what's the benefit here? Well, the benefit is bromotyrosine is really a simple, easy compound, and it's very effective at lowering at least Drosophila fertility. And so we're starting to work on the mosquito right now, because it'll be a very simple way to start to control fertility of mosquitoes, we hope and we think. If you look in the genetics and the phylogenetic trees, are very related. And I'd be amazed that this enzyme has adopted yet another biological function for such a similar organism. So again, here's the unexpected benefit of starting out really interested in chemistry, and we think we might have something that could be actually very important for Intel. So finally, let me just show you. I don't have I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here. It's great, and I'll tell you, it's the first time I've been in a group, and it's the first time for 2 years, and it's the first time I've been able to speak without masks, because I still give lectures with my mask on. But I'm an international group that's helped this is the most recent group that's helped this, but we started this project back in Maryland, continued in Hopkins, and we've been talking about collaboration a little bit, and that's essential. You know, I could never have done this project without all the collaborators. I can't be an expert in crystallography, but it was fantastic to get that. I know nothing about Drosophila until I started collaboration with Xin Chen, who's opened up her lab and trained my students in that. And so that's been wonderful. And so thank you again very much for the opportunity.
In a way, you should be grateful because you show some chemical formulas, and this brings challenge to Amanda's. How do you communicate? Because chemists fix the formula. So it's open for discussion. So, Boyan, do you have a question? Oh, fine, okay.
I also worked with David Bolu at University of Michigan. He's an old fart like me, but he worked with P450s and enzymes that transfer electrons. Is that what I was just?
Yeah, so he also has done a lot of the riboflavin. studies.
Unrivaled.
So, right, so that's what he's done. And so he helped us with some rapid kinetics.
Yeah.
Is that B2?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think so. Yeah, me too. Thank you.
So I'm going to challenge you now because you actually made a wonderful argument for the use of being curious to actually start to investigate a problem. You talked about curiosity. And your curiosity in this system has led you to a place where you can potentially find a way to control mosquitoes. So can you talk a little bit about how you actually are transferring that curiosity to your students? There's a challenge there.
Yeah, now how do I mean, I try to pitch it, I mean, the fascination of learning something new, but also always has to do with like, well, this is how important this is. There always is a context and significance. We can be curious about a lot of things that I wouldn't encourage my students to do, but it has to be something that's significant that would make an impact on people. And so, well, my student who started the Drosophila work was a biochemist, but a very good one. And I said, you have an opportunity. I don't know anything about Drosophila, but I can set you up in a lab where you can do that if you want. I said, here's the potential benefits. We'll learn something. It'll be paradigm shifting of not a major way, but at least in what we know about how this enzyme might work and how halogens might be important.
So basically benefit to the student as well as to the public.
Yeah.
Are there practical ways you can lure the mosquitoes?
Yeah. Oh, so it turns out, well, the first thing to do, and actually this is going to be a discovery grant, I'm going to put it in January, it's a seed grant, is just feed mosquitoes bromotyrosine and look for fertility. I mean, that's the first thing. And actually, I have a new student who did, again, I would say the more academic way is we took the gene of mosquitoes, we expressed it already, we've already done all the characterization, and it does deiodinate iodotyrosine, it debrominates bromotyrosine, and it has very similar catalytic properties. So we know it functions that way. So what's interesting, if we had started mosquitoes, we probably would have dropped it. Because if you look at the expression of this enzyme through mosquitoes in different organs, it's low everywhere. And it might be dumb luck that the Drosophila makes so much of it, it kind of hit us on the head. Well, we should be looking at spermatogenesis. And it's not so clear in mosquitoes. So we already done the entomology, and we want to start actually doing the work of looking at the feeding work.
So I have kind of two related questions. One, I just want to continue on this question. How are you going to feed mosquitoes iodotyrosine? Like if, let's say, it does work well, and would it affect people also?
Oh, so you mean in terms of application?
Application. Mm-hmm.
So the good question. So bromotyrosine, so this would be bromotyrosine we would use. Mm-hmm. And bromotyrosine, we actually generate bromotyrosine too, partly through asthma attacks and things like that. We generate chloral and bromotyrosine a little bit in our bodies, and we can get rid of them. They don't seem to be harmful. How do you get, it's a good point, how do you get mosquitoes killed and not the bumblebees, right? And that's very important. And that's particular feeding traps. So how you can attract insects to different types of food. And that's already kind of in practice in the field.
And then the related question, I was going to ask you if there's anything that you learned about your system that could be used in order to develop, bacteria or some kind of other thing that can help with the cleaning of the halogenated pollutants.
Absolutely, and actually we've been studying that too. So this enzyme is actually could be great for bioremediation. So there are a lot of halogenated phenols that are used in agriculture that sit in the soil, and they're not easily oxidized by our oxygen environment, and that's in fact why the halogen was put there in the first place. But then they sit there. The problem we're trying to overcome is this enzyme is really selective for the tyrosines. Now I showed you that kind of lid that forms. That only is triggered by tyrosines, and if you don't close the lid, it doesn't do this chemistry, which makes this interesting. So we're actually we've been doing some computational work with the protein design, this Rosetta program, to try to redesign the lid so that it can actually work with these. So we are absolutely trying to take advantage of that general process as well.
Thank you.
Let's stop it here. You're wonderful. I don't need to ask anything. Thank you very much. We're a little bit behind schedule on the bench chair. So my question, are we okay if we take, and considering the reception at the end, Can we afford a little stretch legs for 15 minutes? All right. So let's start 15 past, right? Thank you. Enjoy your break. It was great.
Yeah, nice.
You don't know about this part of it,
I
do you? You
know,
know
nice to see you again. I know, yeah. Nice to see you again. Oh, thank you. You know, you gotta stand out. Absolutely. You know we have that time to okay, we'll grab a cup. Okay. Oh.
Oh, right. That's fantastic. Yeah, oh, I love it. But I had to use this little thing. It only has one USB.
I was just asking, we have a new law, he's a graduate student. I don't know if biochemistry or something, he does something with bacteria, I don't know, his name is Michael Wheaton.
Yeah. He's in the
In your group?
not in my group, but I run the chemical biology graduate program, and he's a student in there, and he works for Professor Craig Townsend, who's just a floor above me. So yes, I'm usually prepared to say, "Oh, Hopkins is a big place. I'll never know that," but no, yes, I do know it very well. So he's he's graduating soon. I think he does too. He does too. Yeah. Yeah.
On the way, so.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, that was interesting. I mean, I didn't know you were gonna have some technical.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought it would be good to rise from that to show that you can learn something bigger and broader.
This is impressive. I wish we had a bigger room, more people. Too bad the audience is so small.
But they don't read.
We're happy to talk to anybody. It's always
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yes, you can. All I can say is send them to a friend. Even though rats are now infected with fungus, and those fungus can die, but rats because they're all extremely resistant to fungus. And not fungus. It's interesting, a lot of the but
Everybody is excited.
Great.
Well, that was a nice time, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Just a little bit, it was overbooked.
You cannot
And now you see, but it's all right. We have more space.
Oh, this is great. If nothing else,
This-
just interacting, seeing all you
Yeah,
guys.
it's all-
I didn't have to go to India to go see Kathy, so that's really way easier.
So you
Yeah.
please take your seat.
Yeah, well, in this field. I don't know anything from. I don't know.
Connection below the.
Okay, we are
Amanda,
continuing.
you can sit down too.
Well, I just,
Just listen.
whatever.
All right.
I'm holding
Oh.
on.
Well, sorry I had to push a little bit, but that's my role here, right?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, so welcome back. I hope you got your coffee, got a little bit stretched legs. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce next speaker. Jasna Berčič is a postdoc at Stanford. She and her boss, Lynette Cigelski, are doing a wonderful job, really innovative approach. Jasna is NMR expert. She was actually educated in my lab a few years ago. And I'm actually anxious to hear what they're doing and what's their latest approach, going clearly in new directions. We see bacteria and within the magnet, which is really exciting. So I hope we can welcome her.
Thank you everyone for having me. As you see, I'm a postdoc, not a professor. So I'm very honored that you're letting me share my work with you. And let's just start talking about antibiotics and bacterial cell walls and how we can use antibiotics to target these cell walls.
Michelle, do we need to put microphone? So you're in the back. What do you think?
I can probably talk. Is it better? Better?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so as we all know, antibiotics have saved millions of lives over the years and really revolutionized how we think about medicine. We take it for granted these days, but surgery used to be such a risky procedure in medicine because many people would die afterwards from the infection. So we owe a lot of our progress in medicine to antibiotics. But as you can see from this quote from Sir Fleming, even in 1945, he warned that there might be a time when antibiotics just won't work because we would overuse them or not properly use them and bacteria will become resistant. And this is sort of happening now. We are living in a post-antibiotic era. And on the left, on this chart, we can see the rise of antibiotic resistant strains. So more and more bacteria are becoming resistant. And unfortunately, this has been coupled to a decrease in the research and development of new drugs. So antibiotics, we are not investing enough into development of antibiotics. There are many problems connected to this. And the bottom line is these two are protein combination, and it's predicted by 2050, more than 10 million people will die from antibiotic resistance, which is more than cancer. So the way antibiotics work and how we can maybe find new pathways is, well, we usually want to target something that's very essential to bacteria. And this can be something in the intercellular environment, for example, DNA synthesis, protein synthesis. But as we know, these are also processes that occur in humans. So we have to be very careful to kill the bacteria, but not the person taking it. So this is why the drug development takes so long, because this is not an easy task to achieve. Another good target for antibiotics is the cell wall synthesis. Why we like this target is because cell wall is not present in animal cells and in humans. So it's the bacteroglycan, which makes most of the cell wall, is actually specific for bacteria. And then in the microscope, we can see what actually happens when you treat the bacteria with a cell wall targeted antibiotics. So as the cell tries to divide, it tries to grow, the cell wall just gets thinner and thinner, and eventually it will rupture and the cell will rise. So that's kind of a good mechanism. And a lot of classic antibiotics have been exploiting this target, but as I said, more and more bacteria become resistant. So what would be great to do is learn more about the cell walls and maybe find a new target and try to really come up with better antibiotics. So in general, bacteria can be divided into two classes based on how their cell wall look. On the left, gram-positives have the really thick layer of peptidoglycan, and this is, for example, Staph aureus, MRSA, things we cannot hear about. And on the right is a pretty different situation. So we have a thin layer of bacterioglycan, but on the outside you have the outer membrane. So another membrane that is rich in lipids, and this already tells you that probably not the same antibiotics would be working against both of those. And this is, for example, E. coli, and a lot of resistant pathogens that are becoming a problem in recent years are exactly gram-negative because this membrane makes it so hard to target them. And what I've been mostly kind of also working on is this third type of bacteria, which we don't hear that much about. These are mycobacteria, and their cell wall is incredible. It doesn't only have a bacterioglycan. On top of it, it has another additional layer, totally different, arabinogalactan, which is also a sugar polymer. And this kind of makes it similar in a way with the stick layer to gram-positive, but in addition to that, they also have an outer membrane. And this one is actually much more hydrophobic than gram-negative, so even it would even prevent more of the drugs that would want to go into the bacteria. So this has been a formidable obstacle for antibiotics because they are sort of naturally resistant to most antibiotics that are out there. And but when I started working with this, I noticed that a lot of drugs actually don't target bacterioglycan, and this is because it's buried below all these other layers. And we were actually thinking, well, maybe we could kind of find an antibiotic that would target bacterioglycan. Now, this is a challenge, but our group has been very well equipped to deal with that. So why are mycobacteria important in terms of like significance? Well, actually, one of the most famous human pathogens, TB, tuberculosis, is actually the single most deadly infectious disease until COVID, because it still kills around 1.5 million people each year. We might not realize that because it occurs mostly in the developing world, but still it would be hard not to notice how many people die each year. And here in the developed world, there are actually on the rise lung infections due to non-TB mycobacteria, and these are particularly dangerous for people who already have lung damage, for example, who have cystic fibrosis or COPD or something like that, and for them they can be really deadly. Now, the treatments that exist are always very complicated, 3 or 4 drugs at the same time to really kill that bacteria. And this makes it hard for patients to really stick to their regime. And it takes about 6 months of taking 3 antibiotics each day. And resistance is spreading because they don't take them for long enough. Maybe in developing countries, they don't have access to a doctor. And actually, resistant TB has emerged, and this significantly decreases the treatment success. And this is a big problem. And like you mentioned before, it's a problem elsewhere in the world, it's a problem everywhere. So that was really sort of a motivation why we are working on mycobacteria. And if we kind of take a lesson from the COVID, we can see the infectious diseases still can do a huge problem if we don't have a treatment for it. And on the other hand, if we would just devote all our resources and really tackle this problem globally, maybe we could face antimicrobial resistance before it comes to that, what is predicted for 2050. So, yeah, so kind of outline what part of the project I'm working on. So we are designing new drugs that would target mycobacterial cell walls, specifically bacterioglycan. And we are actually working mostly on modifying vancomycin, which is our existing antibiotic. And in kind of in synergy with that, we are trying to learn more about mycobacterial cell wall. And we are mostly using solid-state NMR for this purpose because it's a wonderful non-destructive method. It really gives an insight into like what is the natural material look like before you degrade it. And we are, of course, using a lot of biochemistry to determine the mode of action in a classical way. I'm not going to show too much of those assays, but we are trying to couple this with our knowledge from solid state NMR to kind of get an insight how our drugs work in them. So why did we choose vancomycin for our work in developing a new antibiotic? Well, mostly because vancomycin is a really good antibiotic. It has a very unique mechanism of action that makes it less likely for bacteria to develop resistance. And it's sort of an antibiotic of last resort for treating MRSA or gram-positives. And how it works is it tackles the assembly of the cell wall. So it all starts inside the cell where the basic building blocks are made, and then they're flipped over to the other side outside the cell, where they get connected by enzyme into this big mushy polymer, which we call peptidoglycan. And what vancomycin does, it recognizes this end, these 2D elements close together, and it sits on it. So it actually inhibits the substrate, not the enzyme. So this is why its mechanism makes it less likely to induce resistance. And we thought this is a great opportunity. What if we could somehow make vancomycin like activity, but broaden it to a whole bunch of other bacteria? So this was done first in our lab for gram-negatives. They noticed that if you just attach a single arginine, which is has a connectivity group, so it's a positively charged amino acids to vancomycin, it can work in gram-negatives. You remember when they had an outer membrane, and it can kind of get into them and inhibit peptidoglycan in this bacteria where you wouldn't usually use vancomycin. So this was very exciting. And it got us thinking, could we use this for mycobacteria, which also have an outer membrane? So first thing you do is you test if this compound would be effective. We had a few strains in the lab that we can test with, so different types of mycobacteria. So enzymatic is something we use as a surrogate for antituberculosis, which we cannot use in our lab because it's a different biosafety level. But this one has been shown to kind of respond to antibiotics, but kind of similarly. And we have two other non-TB pathogens, so MSSs and avian, which are major causes of lung disease in development. So, and this number is just a measure of how much antibiotic you need to kill a bacteria, so the lower the better. And in case of enzymatic and MSSs, we saw 8 or 4-fold improvement in the concentration that's needed. So it's clearly doing something to them. It's working, and these R's actually make things effective. But in these together, these are called like rapidly growing mycobacteria. So they're slightly different than the one on the right, which is a slow growing. So this also tells you that there might be some differences in the cell wall across species, which we might characterize later. So we were very happy with that. We extended the spectrum, and then we went and wanted to understand like how this activity is across several model organisms, just to give us more insight into the mode of action. So our hypothesis was, well, this arginine makes it cross the lipid barrier. It can enter where it has to enter, so to the peptidoglycan, and this is kind of well known with positive charges that sometimes they can more easily penetrate the outer membrane. And when we saw the pattern in gram-negatives and mycobacteria, we saw 8 to 16 time improvement with VR versus vancomycin, and on the other hand, with staph, which is gram-positive, we did not see this improvement. So this made sense to us, and this kind of supported our initial hypothesis. But then we tested in another gram-positive organism, this cellulase, which doesn't have an outer membrane, but still we saw this 8 to 16 time improvement in activity. So that was kind of interesting. And it got us thinking if there's more to this activity than just being able to reach them. When we started thinking, well, maybe there is like a difference in the different bacterioglycan across bacteria, and sure enough it is. Their structure is slightly different. And basically you have what is called a lysine type, which is present in most gram-positive, like Staphylococcus. And then you have the NDAC type that is in all mycobacteria and gram-negative, and very curiously in Bacillus as only gram-positive. So this got me very excited. I was thinking, well, maybe this has something to do with our activity, and especially on the NDAC on the right, if you can see, it has these two oxygens. It's either a carboxylic or carbonyl or amidated carboxylic group. I did a bit of modeling, and I was thinking, well, maybe this like negatively charged part and this positively charged part could kind of interact. And we did a basic micro model based on non-structural vancomycin and bacterioglycan. And this circuit region really shows that potentially they could form either a hydrogen bond or a favorable electrostatic interaction. So this is something, it's a very nice hypothesis, but we are looking into getting animal structural data to see if this interaction is actually taking place. And as I think, like you briefly mentioned synergy before, I was happy to hear that, because particularly in mycobacteria, you always treat with like 3 or 4 drugs, so you want to check if they are going to interact favorably, unfavorably, or in most cases they don't do anything to each other. And we tested a bunch of different drugs that could be used in addition to VR against mycobacteria, and we found with most of them there's no interaction, but Antiviral, which is one of the most famous anti-TB drugs, actually shows synergy, and that means they both work at 4 or lower concentration that they would need if you administer them alone. And we were very happy about that, and if we just think how this might work, is I think that Antiviral, which is small, probably gets in and sort of permeabilizes this outer layer, and vancomycin, which is kind of big, could probably has easier access to bacterioglycans. This is a good strategy for antibiotics if you can find synergy and better than optimized. So switching over to NMR, we are also very interested in just the basic how microbacterial cell walls are made, and a very good method to study them in its native state is solid-state NMR, because this allows you to basically make a sample like this, so just pure cell walls where you, these are empty stacks, so they look like bacteria, but they don't have any proteins inside or any of the cell debris. So they're almost native, full complex, no degradation, no harsh chemical treatment. And you can tell something about this structure even in NMR even when you have so many molecules at the same time. So this is different than traditional method like HPLC, when you really needed to treat the cell wall with HCl or HF or some harsh acid, degrade it into monomers and the components, study that with mass spec, and information get lost with all these treatments. And on the HPLC, for example, I just wanted to show that it never completely solubilizes. The hump indicates that you never get a full information when you try to solubilize something such a huge complex and soluble. So this is giving us opportunity to kind of see it in its native state. And for the mycobacterial cell wall, we could actually get a spectrum, and it was interesting that we could assign some, so we could recognize components even when they are all the same, and we just collect one-dimensional NMR spectrum, and we could recognize all of them in the cell wall. And this will, of course, help us further to kind of monitor the changes with any treatments, with time, between different species, and so on. So this is just, we are just starting to build this toolkit to study microbacteria. And another thing you can do is you can monitor actually not the cell wall, but just the whole cells. So this is even less destructive. You just pellet the cells, dry them, and you can put them straight into the magnet, and you get a spectrum. And of course, the spectrum is even more crowded because you have all the molecules in all the cells at the same time. But still, you can identify some regions that are like related to some of the components of the cell. So you have your RNA in a specific region, your polysaccharides, which are mostly the cell wall, and you have the lipids, which in case of microbacteria are kind of big because of the membrane and the lipids associated with it. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to monitor whole changes that antibiotic does in the context of whole cells. So you don't have, so you can, for one, see all the changes at once, and two, this is like the only direct way to actually see what's happening to the cell when you treat it with antibiotic without like doing some chemistry to like an indirect indication. So as a proof of concept, we started working with some well-known antibiotics such as vancomycin and ethambutol, and trying to see if within the whole cell spectrum if we can see changes that this antibiotic caused. And on the left, I can show you what happened when we treat with ethambutol, and you can see that these peaks, some of them go down. And this, now that we have the cell wall data, now we know these are connected to albinogalactan. And this makes sense because we know ethambutol works on this layer of the cell wall. And the same for vancomycin. We could see changes in reputable even in the context of whole cells. So that was encouraging, and we will use this for other antibiotics that we are currently working on and don't have a clean mode of action. So just for summary, I hope I convinced you that you can sometimes use well-characterized, well-known antibiotics, tweak them just a bit, and maybe extend their spectrum, use it for something new that they were never used before. And this is also, I think it's easier to get approval or get something like that through the clinic because it has a known safety profile and it's just a bit quicker. And we will start being developed for the clinic against UTR infection. And my second point would be that this toolkit that we are building for mycobacteria will be helpful for monitoring and answering all kinds of biological questions, including the mode of action of antibiotics that are kind of unclear even after all the biochemical work has been done. And third, that we still don't know exactly how VR works, and we will now pushing hard into obtaining some structural data that we employ some clever NMR labeling techniques to see if this is really happening, or maybe it's finding somewhere else, which is also interesting. Just to explain why it would have such a potent activity compared to vancomycin in some systems. And lastly, I would just like to thank everyone here for organizing this and inviting me. And of course, my team, Segalski Lab, and my awesome mentor, Lynette. And of course, funders, Cystic Fibrosis Fellowship, which has been funding me for the past 2 years, and I just got a renewal, and NIH.
Very exciting, very nice talk. Nice. Under this.
Yeah, it's interesting that, what does Bill Wender do for your lab? I know that I would have expected somebody like Carolyn Bertozzi to work with you, and I was just curious, he, of course, is a huge organic chemist.
So the Wender Lab helps us do a bunch of vancomycin conjugates.
Yeah.
On the code one, but we are doing several different approaches with vancomycin in different plant structures, or again with the BR8 was published a few years ago, which has an 8 arginines at the same time. So there are the synthesis you know, and we are there.
So what is your really final goal? Micromolar activity? I mean, I know gram-negative bacteria are very dangerous
Yeah.
to us as opposed to gram-positive, which we have more drugs. Where are you headed?
So from clinical perspective, I think vancomycin should not exceed a few micromolar. So then I showed like 8 to 16 with hemoptysis and some harder and coli, which is above maybe the clinical, but then you can synergize that, and this brings the concentration down, which puts it in a clinically relevant range. And actually, in animal models, E. coli, even though the MIC was 8 to 16, it cured DPI. So, you know, it clearly works.
You came to this, how important it is to know target and then play around with it. Do you believe that this sort of NMR studies can really help? Because you have all this averaging of different cells, different way of organizing them and stuff. I mean, it sounds very tempting, but I myself see lots of challenges that probably you will have to address, right?
Yeah, so with solid state NMR, if we would be able to get unique structural data, is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, pin it down to details of structure.
But what we basically hope to do is reader study, which is kind of like nosy. You just see the proximity. This has been shown for Rokita, which is FDA approved. Similar story, and Yaneti did this work, and she was able to show like a secondary binding site in that molecule just with readers. So it could work.
So I have a question of curiosity. So have people ever used phosphorus NMR to actually look? So what can you actually get some feel for changes in environment in RNA and DNA?
Yeah, I'm not sure you can see really RNA and DNA for solid state NMR. I don't think it's so sensitive. But for mycobacteria, I probably didn't show this, but they have a phosphorus linkage in the cell wall, and that's what we're trying to also see if these changes, like just in the linkage density, are sensitive.
Cool, thank you.
All right. Thanks. Let's thank us. I'm so proud. It's an honor, right? This, when you're a mentor, you know, this is like you have a child, right? It's the biggest privilege, sit and grow. Overgrow you, right? So next speaker is Jiri Zetterberg. She's professor at Stanford College. I visited them last week, so I can say this is the best college in US when it comes to the number of people they educate and get PhD degrees. So it's pretty amazing. They don't have graduate school. But coming back to Julia, we got to know each other back in Bordeaux, I guess, because we share interest in what she's going to talk about is non-canonical DNA. She'll explain it all. But she's here. So, I don't want to take the time. Right?
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, everybody who is here. And of course, thank you to the Slovenian Embassy for letting me come and share my work. So my talk will basically demonstrate the collaboration between my lab and Janet's private lab. And I had the luxury of spending part of my sabbatical in Ljubljana. So the title of my talk is Biophysical and Structural Characterization of Non-Canonical DNA that's Implicated in Diseases. And just looking at this title, you can tell that Amanda was right, that scientists need to learn how to communicate better. So I will try my best today, but I promise in the future I will definitely do a better job. So as I said, I spent part of the sabbatical in the Slovenian-American Center. But I'm coming currently from Swartman. I just want to share some of the images. For people from Slovenia, it's a liberal art college, and liberal art college means that some of our students who are chemistry major, they only take about 9 to 12 chemistry classes. The rest 20 classes they take could be in art, in humanities, in social sciences, and such. This is a science center, and these are the windows from my lab. We are founded by progressive Quakers, so the college was co-educational from its founding, and the first graduating class had 4 men and 4 women in it. We have about 1,600 students, and people from US will tell me that most of the high schools are much larger than us. So we're really like one large family. We have only about 15 to 20 chemistry majors. They're undergraduate students, and they're the ones who do research. So the second lesson I want to show you today is that undergraduate students are really capable of doing wonderful work. So I want to thank my research group. We were all remote last summer before, and this is us from the last summer. I'm going to also mention some work from DeAndre, Barrett, Hyun-Kun, and Jessica today in my talk. But of course, even more thanks go to Janet, who, this is my favorite picture of Janet, I really love it. Whoever took it did a great job, who hosted me on sabbatical. As Janet said, we met in Bordeaux, but Janet's actually super well known in the quadruplex field. He's the NMR expert, and sorry, quadruplex, non-canonical DNA structures. And when I was choosing where to go on sabbatical, I thought to learn more about the technique that I knew a lot about, but not in application to the DNA. And I got to work together with Marco Perikowski, and he was the one who kind of helped me through on a day-to-day basis. So I want to thank him. And I want to thank funding from Henry Dreyfus Foundation and NIH. So the point of departure is a duplex DNA. So if you Google duplex and put image, you can see that duplex DNA images are ubiquitous. So every person, I think, no matter what their education level, probably have seen the image, maybe don't know what it is, but like, look at this. It's beautiful. It's also actually very accurate. So the structure of duplex DNA was proposed by Watson and Crick in 1953, and I just want to point out that, of course, they didn't just like come up with it. There was a lot of work done before them that allowed them to suggest the structure. And again, for non-chemists in this audience, it's very, this is very beautiful, very, very simple structure. It's like a Lego. There are 4 blocks total, and there are 2 blocks A and T that match with each other, and G and C that also match with each other. And once you have one strand coded, the second has to follow. There's no other way, which makes DNA very, very kind of well-defined, both in terms of structure and in terms of sequence. We need this because this DNA is here to transfer and to keep genetic information. We don't want to have mutations that happen all the time. We want things to be kind of constant. But in reality, there are a variety of other DNA structures. Many of them have been discovered really right after discovery of duplex DNA. So this is duplex DNA, but you have triplexes, you have quadruplexes, you have 4-way junction, 3-way junction, and you have a opposite kind of rotating duplex DNA. So there's a lot of different structures. This will be referred collectively as a non-canonical. So not something you will expect structures. And my lab is actually very much interested in the quadruplex DNA. Yes, sorry.
It's just in living things, the others are not.
So, for example, 4-way junction is called a holiday junction. Yeah, it's very well known. It plays a very important role. Some other, again, like quadruplex, for example, that's like a main goal of my lab. Biologically, people challenge whether it actually exists or whether it's just mere scientific curiosity. But there's a lot of biological data that prove the existence, the indirect data that prove the existence of quadruplexes in humans. So yeah, majority of them are in humans.
Not just in humans, in other.
But in other, yeah, of course, in other organisms.
Okay.
Yeah, they do exist, correct. So I will tell you today 2 stories. Both of them concern the DNA sequences that are related to diseases. So one of them is the cancer-causing difficult to replicate DNA sequence. It's a repetitive DNA sequence. And other is a satellite. Again, that's where you find the repetitive DNA sequence. And this sequence is related to so-called repeat expansion disease. And those are neurodegenerative diseases. So we have heard today, again, for more for general audience benefit, the word replication over and over. It's actually a relatively simple and beautiful process. So you have your normal DNA, you have an enzyme called helicase. All it does, it unwinds and unzips. So it's basically like a zipper. So now you have 2 separate strands. You recruit another enzyme called polymerase that now uses this as kind of a template and creates the second strand. At the end of this process, you have 2 new DNA, and that's how like viruses replicate, for example, or anybody else for that matter. The problem arises when either of those enzymes don't work well, or when you get a block of some sort. And this block will stop this replication, and that may lead to the chromosomal breaks, to the double-strand breaks. And that leads to like all sorts of rearrangement, translocation, and this eventually gonna cause cancer. So my collaborator, Eric Brown from University of Pennsylvania Medical School, he decided to look through the genome of mouse and see which part of genome gets broken kind of on a regular basis. So he identified a large number of sequences, and the most prevalent one was the CAG-AG gene. This sequence is repeated between 10 and 100 times. Most common repeat is 80. So their hypothesis was that this sequence somehow folds into this non-canonical structure, so like a knot. And now when polymerase comes and try to copy a DNA, this knot is there, it cannot get through, and everything goes to hell, basically. Sorry. So they wanted to know what is the structure with the ultimate goal, how can we prevent it so we can kind of slow down or prevent cancer. As I said, my lab is expert on the G quadruplex DNA, and I didn't point out, but Eric's hypothesis before he came to us, he said there are a lot of guanines, and if there are a lot of guanines, you get this non-canonical structure. I call it canonical non-canonical structure because it's very well studied by now. It's called G quadruplex, and as I said, we are experts on the quadruplexes. I'll just give you a very brief, not even introduction, but kind of idea. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 of those building blocks, guanines. And I told you guanine usually recognizes cytosine, but this is a case where actually they all come together, form this like plane, and these planes can actually stack on top of each other. And they form, this is one plane, second plane, and a third plane. So this is what I knew how to do. So I thought, okay, it's gonna take me 2 weeks. I'm gonna give him his data, I'll be done. So we started working, and this is, yes. This is not what my students typically think. I don't think that anymore. I'm like, anything gonna take long time. But that time I was like, oh, it's gonna be fast. So the people who work with quadruplexes, and I know there's not many of them right now here, the first thing you will do, you will check how the stability of this structure changes with the presence of ions. And these are biologically relevant ions, potassium and sodium. We have it in our blood. Quadruplexes like potassium and sodium, but don't like lithium that much. So this is the stability, how stable. The higher bar, the more stable the structure is. Notice that whether I add potassium or sodium or lithium, more or less in the grand scheme of events, things look the same. So that was the first hint that likely may not be a quadruplex. So we have done a lot of work. Now that, again, after I listened to Amanda, I know not to actually read this through. So I'm gonna let it be. We have done a lot of work. We have learned a lot of things. And the very main things we learned that this structure is not a quadruplex. So the question is still, what is the structure? Because that's the question we try to answer. I came across, before actually being in Janet's lab, this paper that came from Janet's lab. So it's Wojciech and Janet, the author on the paper. And this paper describes the structure, so how things look like, of this gene that is implicated in autism. And after reading this paper, I was very inspired, and I look back at my own structure, and I proposed this model. So this is a model. It had some indirect data, but again, it was inspired by Janet's structure. I'll just walk you through this image, and then I'll show you a little bit more of Janet's work. So these are 2 plots. This is now GC, just like it should be, except what it shouldn't be this quartet. It should be 4 of them, it should be 2 of them together. Now we start here, you go up, you have this loop. Then you have down, you have another loop. So you have 1, 2, 3 loops. And each loop is, again, these are the blocks, but I use circles. So it's GA, 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 GA. So it's very, very simple. It's very kind of beautiful and very symmetric, this structure. And then even more so, do you remember I told you repeat has hundreds of those blocks. So you have to think about how is it going to look in your body? How can you put these little things together? Do they actually even go together? But with this model, it's very easy to see, just add one more loop and just link the second piece. Add one more loop and link the second piece. So that also was kind of nice. And again, like even better was that Janez in his work already saw all the interaction that I was proposing. He saw GA interaction, so that one you will be able, I draw it as a loop, but we have evidence that there's actually interaction between this and this, or maybe this and that. But this is your GA, which is not canonical. G and A blocks should not be interacting per se. He also saw this tetrads that I told you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there are two kinds, there is major groove and minor groove. So this interaction were already known when we proposed the structure. So now we had the model. It's much easier to test when you have a model versus we have done prior to this testing, just kind of trying different things. But once we had the model, it was very much easier to test it. So my student, DeAndre Jordan, he proceeded to making single point mutations. So you guys hear about the cancer causal mutation. Basically, the thing that's supposed to be here gets replaced with something different. So he took every single position and replaced with T, because the sequence is CAG-AGG, there's no T's. So we put T, and if the T causes havoc, means that position was very important. And if the T doesn't do anything, means it's just dangling and doing nothing. And this is color-coded by the stability. So once the T is destructive, which means the position is important, it's going to be in red. So notice how these GC tetrads here are very, very important for structure stability, because once you replace only one, we're not replacing all of it together, only one thing, you destroy the structure. So my lab is actually using biochemistry, but also we're using X-ray crystallography. So again, I did this while Amanda was speaking. So I Google X-ray crystallography popular images. So here is a person doing yoga, and you guys go to, like, when you break your arm, you go to doctor and they do the X-ray. So you know how it works. Like you have an X-ray, the one you get in a medical office. It's the tissues are transparent, but the bones are not, and you can see them. So the X-ray crystallography that we use basically is the same general idea. It's like a microscope into the molecule. Where do you start? You start with a crystal. Again, crystal, the same crystal as you have crystal balls and like beautiful rock crystals. Any other crystals you saw, they have the same idea. They have a very perfect arrangement of every molecule. If the arrangement is indeed perfect, then you will see this data. So it's called the diffraction pattern. It's just beautiful, basic as starry night. You can take this data, you can use mathematical program that even sometimes I don't really understand, and it will give you something called electron density, which you interpret by showing the model. And you guys saw the model already. This is a protein structure, and it tells you how it looks like. And again, you can think about this as a big microscope that you can look inside your own molecules, and it's very exciting because this kind of information can tell you a lot of things, as you saw in talks prior to mine, how molecules work, why they work, and then how can we change them to make them better. So anyway, to start, you need a crystal. Well, this diffraction pattern, I just wanted to help you understand kind of what it is per se. Many of you may have heard about famous Photo 51. Photo 51 is shown here. And this is Rosalind Franklin. So Rosalind Franklin in 1953, or by 1953, was able to collect diffraction patterns. So this is diffraction pattern on DNA powder. This is a diffraction pattern. This is the data we collect. And this data inspired Watson and Crick and Wilkinson to propose the helical structure of DNA, the one I just showed you. So that's what is diffraction pattern. That's the data we are collecting. But you need a crystal. So we try to grow these crystals. Again, crystals can be from this large to tiny. We need a small crystal. Growing large crystals is kind of hard. We had a whole bunch of crystals. None of them gave the diffraction pattern. So we had to kind of devise different ways to improve our crystals. So there are very many different types of things we have done. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them. This work was done by Barrett Powell. I will talk about this engineered base pairs. So basically, you have your model. This is our model. You have a little legs on it, like you do here. You can devise the base pairs that will both kind of connect the legs, so make things less flexible, but also interconnect the molecules. So you're kind of building a crystal like Lego from little blocks. So this was inspired by Ronan Marmerstein, who is a professor at Penn. So this is our core piece, and these are little legs that we added. And we did it relatively randomly, but such that if you look, this thing's gonna kind of fold, and then two things come together, and in the beginning. So AGTC, so this is blocks that fit very well with each other. So these are Watson-Crick bonding. So we know it works well, and that will make the whole thing more stable. So once we design all these different variants of the DNA, we need to make sure that they still resemble what we want to study, right? Because now we change things, maybe it's going to be completely different. We cannot afford that, because I don't want to spend so much time learning about something that's completely irrelevant. So this is a signature, it's a spectroscopic signature, it's a fingerprint, right? Like we all have unique fingerprints of the sequence I want to study. So then I look at all the rest. They look, okay, this one doesn't look good, so we just put it to the side. The rest of them look nearly unchanged. We also look at their stability. You remember I already showed you the bars, how high the bar, the more stable. Again, in the grand scheme of events, things are relatively the same. There are a little bit more variations. We decided not to worry too much. There's no dramatic stabilization or destabilization. We also look at their mobility, how fast they run down. This is called the gel. But again, we are only looking for similarities. And more or less, they all look kind of similar to each other and similar to what we're trying to study. So we were all happy with it. We were able to get crystals. So this is a crystal, this is our crystal. It looks like somebody chewed the edge of it, which is okay, we can use this side. This is a crystal in a loop. That's what you need to actually collect the data. And this is our diffraction pattern. So everything looks great. So we did the crystal, we got diffraction pattern. Now we're using that, putting through the programs, getting the data, the electron density into which I'm gonna fit the model, but that step doesn't work. So we try and try, we have more things we're gonna try, but if one thing doesn't work, then you go to a different thing. So we switched to NMR, and that's when I arrived in Janet's lab. NMR stands for nuclear magnetic resonance. Did anybody here did MRI? So MRI, yeah, we have many people. So MRI, it's a magnetic resonance imaging. So what do you think would have happened if we called MRI, which is the same as NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance? How many people would go and actually get it done on them?
Zero.
So MRI that you have done, there's a big magnet, you are put on this like slide and you go inside. It's exactly the same with a sample. Our magnets are like this direction, that's the only difference. And the hole is much smaller hole, but otherwise it's the same experiment, absolutely the same experiment. So when I arrived in Janet's lab, we designed a lot of different DNA sequences. Notice this is just like a code. This is what's different about each of them. And in my lab before arriving, we already looked at all of this and we knew a little bit about them, what they do, how they do and such. This is again Marco. Most of the work, the NMR work I'm going to show you what has been done not by me. So I'm presenting work that was done by Marco and by some other students. So each of the sequences you saw gives unique signature. And again, Jasna showed us a spectra. It looks the same general idea. So this is the signature and we can interpret this signature and get structural information, which means how things look like. So notice there are little labels. There was a lot more work done that went into, again, this is proposed model. So now this model is proposed based on NMR data. Again, not only what I'm showing you here, but a lot more data. And what you see, this model is not exactly the model we came up with. Our model was a little bit less informed because our data are completely indirect. This is more direct. This data tells you a little bit more that this is truly next to that. But if you look at the general scheme of event, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 GC base pairs, and I had 2 quartets, each of which had 2 GC base pairs. So that's present. There's also 1, 2, 3 loops. And the loops are the same. They are GA loops. So that is present. Even again, after so much work that was put by Marco, there's no finishing details on this structure. Some things are just too flexible. So then they decided to cut things shorter. So this is the thing we really want to study, CAG, but now the ends are like shorter and mutated, but we wanted to see maybe we can actually nail down at least one piece, use that information to transfer to other pieces. So again, you see this kind of, it's called stem, and this is the loop. So after yet more work, again, this is work done by Marco and his student, they were able to come up with a structure. So again, Steven showed you protein structure with like this coils. Proteins are much, much larger. This is structure shown by each separate building block. This is a G and C and C and G and A and T. So each things we can see how far they are from each other. And we can see what's happening here in the loop. For example, this and this guy, they like that. And that's a stable interaction that keeps it kind of like stable. And there's this and this guy, they're like this. And this is also stable interaction. So now with this at hand, we can start like understanding the structure. And as I said, this is relating to stopping the, causing the replication stress and cancer. So now we can start to understand why there is a replication stress and how to avoid it. So after this whole project, I wish I gave you the final answer. Again, this is our structure. I would love that. But we have a lot more questions than we have answers. And that's kind of how scientific process is. You kind of get more questions as you do more work and more questions and so on. So for example, the crystallography work, we still don't have the answer. We don't know how this repeat actually repeats itself in biological environment. We don't know who binds to it. So we want to know whether protein binds to it or small molecule binds to it. And again, eventually we want to find out how to actually treat this disease. This is just to show you that I told you you can actually stack them next to each other, but you can also stack them on top of each other. And we don't have the answer, but we're trying to find it. So I have a second project. I hope you have it. It's much shorter. So the second project relates to, again, the repetitive DNA sequence from the satellite. It's a part of your chromosome. The satellite DNA was considered to be junk because it's just the same thing over and over and over. Nothing should be happening. But now we have more and more data that suggests that these kind of things play a role in, in a variety of diseases, in biological processes. So some functions include maintaining the stability of DNA, facilitating protein interaction, and the particular repeat I'm going to talk to you about today, called satellites 3, it's known for its nucleotide repeat expansion diseases. Again, those are neurodegenerative diseases. So you guys already prepared. This is my student, Henton Lee. She grew crystals. Those were the first crystals. Then they got improved, and I call this Steve Jobs crystal because apparently Steve Jobs like straight edges. So we got the most perfect crystals. The crystals don't have to be perfect actually. The best crystal on this picture is this guy. So this little kind of not even super perfect guy, but that was the best crystal. We were able to get diffraction pattern, we were able to get electron density, and we were able to get models. So we actually got through all the steps to the end. And this one, I can show you the structure. So Erin Chen, she took the students in my lab, they spent only 1 or 2 years. They move on, and I need to get new students. So nowadays, Erin took the project and was able to kind of finish it up. Again, this is the model, and you can see again, this is your guanine, building block, adenine, thymine, adenine. So again, this is a building block. There are 4, very simple. For DNA, it's very simple. So what we see here, I told you A and T, it's normal. It's that's what you would expect. T and A, the same thing. But now you have AG, and things already look crooked. GA, the same thing. The end pieces of that is 2 guanines, but this is just a tiny piece of the structure. So when you actually put it together in a more normal way, so that's how it looks like. First of all, we have 1 strand and second, so it looks like a normal duplex. But in a normal duplex, these building blocks will be only ATs or GCs. But what we see, TAAT, that's good. AG, that's called non-canonical. This is not normal. And then what we see is G and G. They don't interact like this, like you would expect things to interact. They just like kind of slide under, but I told you this interaction is also a very nice interaction, very stabilizing. Again, this kind of looks like a normal duplex, but on the side, it's much, much narrower. So it's very different structure, and your cell doesn't know how to deal with it. So once the cell sees this, it's gonna get stopped. It's gonna be like, what is it? What do I do with this? For chemists in the audience, this is G, 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 G step. G, 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 G. This is what keeps this very stable. It's a very favorable interaction. There was an MR published a long time ago in 1994 for the very similar, not the same, for similar DNA piece. Now you have only one strand like this. This is called the double hairpin. And they had G and G like that. We had G and G like this. So again, oh yeah, and the last thing, this is just a beautiful thing. When you have crystal, you have to pack things. It's just like you pack in your suitcase. Except in the crystal, you have to pack the same thing in the same location over and over. So you have this pink molecule, and pink molecule, and pink molecule, and it goes forever and ever. You have this blue and blue, you have the yellow, yellow, yellow. So it's just really beautiful. This is just kind of like, my student said, oh, it looks like a fence, basically. Because of this beautiful, perfect packing, we have very high resolution. This is the same as your camera. You know, you take high resolution pictures, you can see tiny, tiny details. So the smaller the number, I think scientists confusing you guys today because there are a lot of smaller numbers that are better than large numbers. In life, you always want things to be larger, but the smaller the number, the higher the resolution, the more details you get to see. So again, when I came to Janec's lab, we did not have the structure yet. So we tried to actually determine the structure using NMR. So this is the temperature dependence. So this is the signature. Again, this is the same signature idea that you guys saw. We increase the temperature and you see things changing. And by that, you can tell whether they have more stable things fall apart, things form. So we kind of figure out the good temperature to do experiments. We were able, again, now so-called assign, so find one peak corresponding to each building block, and that's done through the specific labeling, site-specific labeling method. So this will be very, in some sense, you may think you already have a structure, why do you need more structure? Well, in crystallography, when you build this crystal, you kind of freeze solid things. And in NMR, things can behave the same way as they behave in your cell inside of your body. So we will hope that things don't look the same, but things don't have to look the same. And the advantages of an NMR is a closer to biological environment. So we're really looking forward to finishing this work. So in conclusion, my lab, mostly we're using crystallography, but again, the power of, you know, being in academia, you have a freedom to go somewhere, and I was very lucky to go to Janec's lab. I learned completely new method. I have much better understanding of it, and especially the power of it. And my goal of my lab is to understand these non-canonical DNA structures and how they kind of regulate things in your body and lead or not to the diseases. So with this, again, I'm going to say one more time thank you, specifically to Ambassador Tony Kaiser and to Minister Borstan. Borstan, you have her name. Thank you guys for welcoming us here. I want to thank my fellow scientists for your wonderful presentations. There's not enough I can say thank you to Janec for his hospitality and things I learned from him. Marco for all his hard work. I forgot to mention at the beginning, but all the NMR were done through the CERIC initiative, and it's an amazing initiative where you can apply for time and you can get to run anything you want on a very, very fancy instruments. Just kind of, shout out to Janec. We have already, so the work I had just talked to you about, we haven't published, we haven't actually finished yet, but I work in a collaboration with Niels Onheimer and then Janec and Marco, and we characterize the G quadruplex, something I know finally, from mitochondrial DNA that relates to a lot of mitochondrial diseases, and how it responds to this molecule called berberine, which is a potential drug. So this work has been published after our sabbatical. So I want to thank all for your attention.
That was wonderful. Thanks also. for citing all my colleagues. The floor is open.
That was a great picture of him, but that's
Yeah, Clement deserves a.
I want to go back to the very early part of the dependence on or lack of dependence on potassium, sodium, and lithium. So is it just, so there's nothing, is there no cation in the middle, it's just phosphate backbone stabilization?
Yes, I think so. And again, I didn't have time to, I had kind of time, but it was very technical. The paper that Yannis published, their structure is very unusual, and the field, Yannis usually says, and it's true, the field is still very suspicious because his DNA and mine, they're very broad in reach, and everybody would expect it to fold into quadruplex. And then they also did not observe the ion dependence. In fact, they determined their structure in lithium, and quadruplex people never work in lithium.
And would divalent cations mess
Yes.
things up, or
No,
it stabilizes it even more?
Magnesium stabilizes very beautifully.
Okay.
Yeah. So they usually need about 100 millimolar potassium to do the same job as 1 millimolar magnesium.
If I may, this is not, but what we are figuring, level of sequences we do for disease is just improving day by day. Somehow it's in our brain that everything we knew about human genome was done in 2000, 20 years ago. It's in fact not true. Daily, and what is beauty of it, medical doctors start to report. And that's where she comes in. We work on another retreat, as you know, some really burning things that medical doctor report, but of course, as she nicely explained, we don't know function of those and to understand its structure. And I think we have to admit the field was a little bit prestigious. Geez, oh, that's a quadruplex. It's a little bit more complex than that. And I think that's the beauty of the talk. So another question. You know, it's another dogma that we live on, structure, function. And her first example is, this is so dynamic. This is opening up our brain. There might be a little percentage, maybe 1% or even less.
Yes.
And that's important. But when we study them, it's just a big soup. I think soup is a good word. Right? It's just a lot of stuff. And it's a little bit hard to methodology we use to then understand and exactly connect. So I really enjoyed it. Another comment? If not, Lilia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we come to our final speaker. Yeah, we'll get some help. Corbin, will you help? So, Professor Sarah Woodson, it also comes from Hopkins University, but we'll hear really different stuff. I think it's not continuation at all, but we have this non-coding RNA, and she's clearly RNA queen. I met her in Japan years back. And, so you'll be impressed. I mean, Professor Wood's a clearly well-established scientist. She's been president of RNA community and so on. This is by itself a big thing. And also insights we get. So I think we're up for the treat. I think that's what Americans would say. Sarah, floor is yours. I see things are working for you. So.
Yes.
You need a little bit of help? Or?
No, I just need to find my USB port here on this adapter. All right. Well, thank you so much, Yannis, for this wonderful, maybe I'm more audible this way. All right, and wonderful invitation. I've enjoyed all the talks so much. I hope I can live up to your flattering introduction and all the nice talks that have gone before mine. And I also want to thank Ambassador Kaiser for hosting us here so wonderfully. So I do want to tell you about some RNA and what it does and how we're trying to understand how the RNA molecules work. And actually, I just got a great introduction to this from Lilia's talk, who's told you all about DNA molecules and how they form these helical structures. And so RNA is very much like DNA. It can form those same kinds of structures. But one of the messages I have for you today is that RNA performs a very different function in our bodies, and that's why we need to learn about it. And actually, I think 2020 was maybe the year of RNA. I can start off with that story. So
I'm old enough to remember O.J. Simpson trial. Okay, so there is a confession, and I think this is when people learned about DNA and PCR. Now we take that for granted, right? 23andMe, and you can figure out that maybe your long lost neighbor was actually your uncle or something. I don't know, but so now we all know about RNA. Unfortunately, RNA's not done. We're not post RNA era. We're still in the era of RNA. Okay. So what is RNA and what is it doing? Well, maybe you learned. Let's see, this is going to be on. Okay, it's on. Okay, there it goes. So maybe you learned in a high school class or some other time that I'm just going to actually use my pointer here because I think that's going to look better. That DNA in your genes, right, can be copied into RNA strands. And one of the functions of those RNA strands then is to send the information that will specify the synthesis of a particular protein in the cell, right? So the DNA can be copied into the RNA, and then the RNA can give you instructions for making that protein. So I'm going to tell you that RNA is super important, of course. And why? Well, it's a nucleic acid like the DNA that Lily was just telling you about. So just like DNA, it can contain genetic information. You can think of it as a gene information carrier. But it was discovered that RNA molecules can also do things. They can be active in cells. For example, they can act as an enzyme and carry out some chemical reaction in the cell. They can be controllers. They can dictate when a particular gene is going to be turned on and when it's going to be turned off. So they can do things as well as contain information. And this realization, which was in part through the discovery of this enzyme action of RNA, was by these two gentlemen, Sid Altman and Thomas Cech. So they won the Nobel Prize for this in 1989. But this discovery really set off a revolution in the way that biologists think about how our genes work. And it is not just this sort of simple, it's called a dogma of molecular biology, but RNA molecules can do many other things. So besides transmitting the message or the information for specifying proteins, there are many RNAs that don't code for a protein, but they do things in cells. So I really want that pointer, but it's not working on the screen. So they might be the machinery that synthesizes proteins, and that's actually what I'm going to talk about today. So this is called the ribosome. Some RNAs are not enzymes, but again, they're the controllers. And if the experts in the lab and in the group may have heard of microRNAs, for example, that are very small segments of RNA that are crucial for turning genes on and off, particularly during our development. So specifying, whether a cell is going to be, a brain cell or a kidney cell, et cetera, or actually also particularly important for sculpting the neurons in the brain and ensuring that those neurons make the right connections. And then there's other RNAs that have been discovered really relatively recently, even in the last 10 years. Actually, we're still discovering new types of RNA molecules. So it's kind of amazing. We actually don't know what they all are in our cells, and it's still open. All right. So there's all these sort of non-coding RNAs that have all these other special tests. And I've already mentioned the fact that they're really important for controlling how our cells work, for development, brain function. They turn out to be critical in aging, cancer, many types of diseases. So what we would like to understand is, how do these RNA molecules work? How do they do what they're supposed to do? And then, of course, can you use them for certain kinds of technology? So one example of that technology that I'm sure you've all heard of course, is that these RNA vaccines, maybe you've received one of these or two of these. And so these RNA vaccines are based on this concept that, again, the messenger RNA can code for a particular protein. So in the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, they're coding for the spike protein. Those are the red little blobs that you see in those pictures of SARS. And that's something that our immune system is very well able to recognize. And so but to make these vaccines, of course, it was necessary to come up with, some particular messenger RNA that could be packaged into the vaccine. So actually, one thing I wanted to also say, so that this is a really nice idea because the mRNA by its nature is transient, and so it will work for a time in the body to produce the spike protein, and your immune system will learn to recognize that as foreign. But after a while, it's broken down naturally, and it just goes away. So it doesn't change us permanently. Well, our immune system should remember, but it doesn't change your genes, right? So it's a nice strategy for getting this sort of temporary response in a body. All right, so how did they do this? Well, this turned out to require quite a lot of science and technology that went into making this possible. So it was necessary to know how to optimize the instructions that would make that spike protein so that it would act very efficiently in human bodies and produce lots of that protein. And that actually requires a very intimate and detailed knowledge of how the cell's machinery is reading out that coding sequence. And another important aspect is that, like many messenger RNAs, there are these non-coding regions on either side. So these are parts of the RNA that don't give the instructions for making a protein, but again, play very important roles in controlling the activity of that messenger RNA. So this is an example that really actually is based on decades of basic science research and also technological development, also a lot of technology went into creating the nanoparticles, the container for the RNA. So there's a lot of science behind this. It might seem as if they just popped out of nowhere, but that absolutely wasn't the case. It was a lot of work that went into this. Another example, which is kind of a completely different example of RNA technology, is the so-called CRISPR. How many people have heard of CRISPR? Oh, great! A fairly good fraction of you. And it turns out that these. So what is CRISPR, right? And it's this. It's really a partnership between an RNA, which is symbolized. I should say this. It's symbolized by these little lines, which is indicating, again, those building blocks that can come together in DNA, just as you saw in Leo's talk. And so when you see these in my slides, you can just think RNA, don't need to. And then the big blob is the protein. So protein and the RNA work together, and they can target DNA and cleave it. And this actually is a kind of bacterial immune system. It's the way bacterial cells can recognize foreign DNA and destroy it before it harms the bacteria. But these two colleagues of mine actually realized in about 2006 that they could engineer this system to be able to make very specific changes in other kinds of DNA, in human DNA, and plant DNA, and bacterial DNA, and so on. So this has given rise to this enormous quantity of numbers of important applications in gene diagnostics and gene editing and many other biotech applications. And so this is an example of a breakthrough that can really come from anywhere, because the scientists who were originally studying these molecules as bacterial immune systems, I mean, they had absolutely no idea at that time that this would give rise to this huge biotechnology industry. There are many biotechnology companies that have been started in the US and Europe, all over the world, to exploit this application. And it just started out, somebody was studying, strange microbes in beach scum, basically. That's how it started. So it's really amazing. All right, so what do I want to tell you about today? So the rest of the time. So my lab would like to know, how these molecules work, and that turns out to be, necessary to understand their three-dimensional shapes, which is another message that you've already got from Lilia. And also how these RNAs are coming together with proteins in the cell, which they usually have to do. So I gave you the example of CRISPR. It's a partnership between a protein and an RNA, and many of these non-coding RNAs work
in such a partnership. So we want to understand how that works. And to do that, we're going to use the ribosome as an example. And the ribosome is the cell's machinery that synthesizes proteins. It's very abundant in cells, and it's essential for all life forms. And it's made up of long RNAs and then about 50 to 80 different proteins. And so these components, the RNA and the protein components, have to come together, and it's in a very particular way. It's not just some they kind of mush together in some kind of random thing. It's really it's like a beautiful architecture, or a machine that has to really be built precisely in order to operate correctly. So here's a picture of how people like to depict this. So sorry, now I'm getting into science, but you don't need to know the details. Just there's one important thing I have to tell you. All this gray squiggly stuff in there, it looks like spaghetti. That's depicting the path of the RNA strand. And so Lilia told you that the DNA can make these very particular contacts or bridges between the A and the T, the G and C building blocks. RNA can do the same thing, but it can loop back on itself and make lots of those kinds of interactions. So think about those nice, beautiful structures she showed you, and now just make it bigger, lots bigger. So that's what you're looking at, just big. Okay, I think yours were maybe 20. Okay, so hers were 20. This is 1,500. Okay, all right. And to make this work, all those yellow blobs, those are the proteins that have to come together with the RNA. And again, as I said, it actually has to be put together in a very particular way. So very important experiments that were done now many years ago, almost 40 years ago, it showed that the proteins can join together with RNA, but they have to do so in a particular hierarchy. You don't need to know any of these details except all these things are just indicated in the names of the proteins, and they have to come on, in a order. And the really remarkable thing about living systems, about biological the molecules that are in our cells, is that they are capable of assembling themselves. In other words, each of the proteins and the RNA molecules contain in them the instructions that will tell them how to come together and form the right shapes. You don't need to go in there, like a little robot and tell them, okay, a little instructor and say, do this. It's almost like maybe a dance troupe, who's very well rehearsed, and the dancers know, through all the rehearsal, where they're supposed to be at the right time and how they should all move together, to make the right, shapes and forms and structures on the stage. So it's much more of that. All right. So how could you answer this question? So I'm trying to give you two examples, and hopefully it's not too technical. So one early set of experiments that we did was also using X-rays, which you've heard a lot about today, but in a very different way. And that is to take advantage of the fact that the X-rays can generate very reactive molecules, in this case, hydroxyl radical, that can damage proteins and RNAs. And so the logic of this experiment that we did was we would mix the RNA together with all the proteins that will make that structure I showed you. And so they will just start to come together because this is a spontaneous process. And at various times, allowing them to come together, we can hit them with these X-rays and the hydroxyl radical, which will start to damage all the RNA that's on the outside of the structure, but all the RNA that's managed to fold up correctly in that spaghetti, parts of the spaghetti that are inside or that have a very large meatball sitting on top of them, those parts will be protected, right? So we can just read out that damage spectrum, and we will know, okay, which parts were folded and which parts were not yet. So it's like getting a lot of snapshots of the process, and as you know, if you take a lot of snapshots, you can get a movie. So we would like to have a good movie, lots of frequent snapshots, and that means you have to supply the X-ray, a lot of X-rays in a very short time. So to do that, we made use of a large facility, it's called the synchrotron, that's in Brookhaven National Lab, in our case in Long Island, New York. This is this very large building basically has electrons going around it, very, very high energies, and which can deliver X-rays. And so we made use of this to get lots of X-rays in a short time. People use this also to get the kinds of the structures that Lilia told you about, and many other applications. It's used by scientists, both basic scientists, scientists from industry, for example, scientists who want to image, for example, the structures of silicon chips or new materials, say to make batteries. Many, many different applications rely on these federally supported national facilities that are, we have about 5 of them or so in the United States. All right. Okay. So from this, what do we learn from all of this? And so one thing that we learned is that lots of bits in the RNA are protected really quickly. So all those red, if you can see them, there's little red splotches all over there. Those were parts of the RNA that were able to fold in about 1/10 of a second, which is about as quick as we could do the experiment. And that was interesting because some of those correspond to the spots where the proteins have to bind. So it told us that the proteins could hop on there, like super fast. So that was nice. And what I'm not going to show you, I'll just tell you, is that we also learned that although the proteins can hop on super fast, the RNA and the proteins have to continue to change their shape after they come together. It's maybe, you can think of a kind of a dating analogy if you want, right? And, maybe you can get together, but any of you are married or have a partner or so on, know that there's lots of adjustments that have to be made. It's really important. Right, exactly. And the analogy is better because it's really important to make those adjustments if you want to stay together. Yeah. Okay, same thing here. Unless the RNA and the protein change shape together, the complexes are not, they won't stay together. It'll just fall apart and the process will just fail. Okay. So that leads to the next example. We wanted to understand a little bit better how the proteins can hop onto the RNA as the RNA is first being made in the cell. So here I have to back up and tell you a little bit more. This is just a diagram of a stretch of DNA, the gene that would code for the RNA, the ribosomal RNA that we're looking at. And this little blob here is meant to represent that polymerase enzyme that copies the DNA into the RNA. All right. And so it's going to just move down this gene, copying, and the RNA is just going to get longer and longer. That's represented here in my cartoon by the little lines. And then, the proteins represented by the colored circles can just start hopping on. Right? All right. So the idea that that the proteins could start changing the shape of the RNA as the polymerase is making the RNA came from some old experiments in which people used an electron microscope to get very detailed pictures of these molecules. So this is kind of an amazing picture. What you're looking at here, the long kind of line that's going through it, that's a picture of the DNA that codes for the ribosomal RNA. So you can get a picture of it. And all these bits, stringy things that are emerging, so those are the RNAs that are being made. So the RNA copies, and you can see there's a lot of them. So that's because there's many polymerase enzymes that are going down the DNA, and they're copying the DNA into RNA. So these are all the RNA bits. And then you can maybe also see that the RNA looks like it's kind of got knobs, or sort of, it looks a little blobby. And that's because the proteins are starting to load onto the RNA and make it starting to form it into the shape that it needs to take ultimately. All right, so this is a wonderful picture, but we wanted to know, in detail, particularly how long does this take? So this picture was kind of, like this is kind of a dead picture. It's been just, flattened out and prepared for the microscope. So we'd like to see it sort of in live action. Okay, so, and in particular, we want to ask the question, so are the proteins really going to be able to lock the RNA in place and kind of build up the complexes, or is it going to be more complicated? And it turns out it's more complicated. And I already mentioned that one reason why it's more complicated is because the RNA and the protein have to change their shape after they come together. All right, so how could we do this? So a current postdoc in the lab, a very talented one, came up with a method for looking at this happening. And this takes advantage of the fact that you can use specialized microscopes to image single molecules. So here, what I'm showing you is this, we have this microscope slide, and we're gonna chemically attach to that microscope slide the end of an RNA that's in the middle of being made by a polymerase. And we used a trick to just stall the polymerase, so it can get going for a little ways, and then it's just halted temporarily, so we can capture it and anchor it to the slide. And then this, in my cartoon, this is the DNA again, that's what it's supposed to represent. Here's that polymerase is copying the RNA, copying the DNA into RNA. Okay, so so that's the setup, and so we can put this in a microscope that's sensitive enough to detect individual fluorophore molecules. So you can illuminate that with a laser in a way that most of the light is actually reflected away from the sample, but some of it will create a faint wave of light that will just light up only the molecules that are actually attached to the slide. And so we can look at them. If we want to see how the proteins bind, then what Maggie did was that firstly she would add more of those building blocks back to these are the nucleotides, so that the polymerase enzyme can continue or can resume essentially making the RNA. So that will happen. And then at the same time, you can add one of those proteins that make up the ribosome, and that also has a fluorophore, a dye attached to it, so a little colored molecule. All right, so the trick here is that when you add this, synthesis will restart. You can watch the proteins bind because they have a little colored molecule attached to them. And then one last trick is that when the polymerase gets to the very end of the DNA, there's another little colored dye there, colored molecule, and it glows when you hit it with the laser, but it will glow much brighter when the polymerase gets to the end. So that white flash tells us, the synthesis of the RNA is finished, and then the red coming will tell us, the protein arrived. Okay. I don't know how easily you can see, but here's a movie. So you're looking at one of these microscope slides, and in this channel on this side, so this half of the slide is showing you the signal from the green, and when the polymerase gets to the end, they would go white. And then this side is showing the red. When the dots appear over here, it means the protein has arrived. I know, but well, I'll give it a try. So here we go. So the molecules move around a lot, and here come the red ones. So the protein is binding. And I don't know if you saw the flash there. So these yellow arrows, by the way, are pointing to the same molecule. It's just on this side we're looking at the green, and the other side we're looking at the red. You can try this again. All right, there went the bright. Yep, maybe you missed it. It's a little fast, but proteins are binding and then they're coming off. All right, hopefully at least you get a little idea of how we can answer these questions. I'm gonna stop this and go over this. All right, so much easier to look at. You can just hone in on one of those molecules and look at one at a time, and then you can just get the trace. And so here we're looking at the green, and there's this big spike in green when the polymerase finishes making that particular RNA molecule. And then here's a comparison. So here's the time that we take to synthesize the RNA. And at the same time that's going on, we get lots of red spikes. And this shows all the times that the protein is binding. But you might notice one problem we did, which is that it's falling off again. So those are spikes, like the protein's coming and is leaving. And that wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to stay married, but they didn't stay married. Why not? Right. So we got very worried. We thought, she did tons of experiments. Like, oh my goodness, something terrible happened. We messed it all up. Our protein must be bad. So this is what scientists go through. It's like, oh, this is true. So you just work. Finally, it's true. Okay, so we figured that out. She did a lot of work. And what we actually ended up having to, and there's some goes longer. So what did we learn from all of this? And that was is that our idea about how the RNA and the proteins were supposed to come together was actually wrong from the start, and we had to revise our idea. And so what we realized is that the proteins, especially when they bind just one at a time, they will bind, but then they fall off again. And the reason for this is that the RNA has not yet had the time to get into the right shape to be able to make a fruitful encounter with that protein. So they try and fail, so tries and this kind of thing, right? So lots of false starts. But when you have multiple proteins, so Maggie did many more experiments I didn't show you. When multiple proteins try to bind, now they actually, in a way we don't understand, they kind of help kick the RNA into the right shape much more quickly. And their mutual interaction on the same piece of RNA allows a stable complex to be formed much more quickly. And this is important because this is what's needed to get the assembly of that whole ribosome going. And so once you have to get to that point to sort of say, okay, in the end, we're going to make the right thing. So this was, so we didn't realize this going in, but we learned it at the end. So again, why should you care? Well, I told you that ribosomes make proteins in cells that are really essential for life. And it also turns out that what we realized is that the quality of making ribosomes depends on how many proteins are available to bind to that RNA within the short time window in which it's being synthesized. And this is interesting because it turns out that there are a number of human diseases that are called ribosomopathies, that arise from either genetic defects or acquired defects in the numbers of these ribosomal proteins. Either a ribosomal protein is missing, it's just lacking in that cell, or it has somehow been mutated in a way that prevents it from functioning normally. So these are just some of the names. There are many other diseases that are known, and it turns out that many different forms of cancer actually have defects in producing ribosomes. And that causes kind of like a follow-on problem in the cells. The ribosomes are defective. That means they don't do a good job at making the cell's proteins, which means the cell has defective proteins, which means, so it all goes bad. Yeah, all right, okay. So I'm at the end, and I hope I just left you with a little bit of a taste of the kinds of experiments that we can do to look at how RNAs and proteins come together, and how this can help us understand some of the basic rules that dictate how the RNAs perform, but also will help scientists be able to engineer those RNAs for particular applications like vaccines, even CRISPR, and many other important applications. All right, so like everyone else here, I did not do this work all by myself, but I had this wonderful team of young scientists in my own lab. So some of them are here. And then also many collaborators at other universities, including Tek Ha, when he was at the University of Illinois, and he's now at Hopkins with me, and many other scientists. And we then appreciate the constant support, financial support from the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for really inspiring and broadening the scope. This is fantastic. The floor is open for discussions, questions. Oh.
I was just curious, what is the time scale of producing these proteins? You started talking about it, but is it seconds or what is it?
Yes, I should have put that on the slides. So synthesis of the RNA takes, in bacteria, it would take about 30 seconds. And in humans, it would take probably about 2 minutes, something like that. And to put the whole thing together in bacteria takes about 2 minutes. It takes longer than that in humans.
You made a wonderful case. Now you need proteins and cooperative. What about cofactors like cations that we were discussing earlier?
Yes, they are also essential. We believe that for the most part, there's enough magnesium. So magnesium is essential salt that we all need, and there's enough of it in cells to allow the RNA and the proteins to come together as they ought to do.
Julia.
I have a question. You said that the proteins interact with each other and with RNA to get this whole thing going. And you also told us that you have between 50 and 80 of them, but in your study you use only some. So how do you actually need all 80 to kind of make things all work? And how did you choose this like subset? Which works?
Very good question. So the protein that we, in the pink blob, we chose that one because it was thought to be one of the first ones that has to come on, that has to bind. And then when that wasn't working as it was supposed to do, we just started going out from there and choosing the proteins that bind nearby in the final structure. And she just started adding more and more until she got to a point where it seemed like it was enough. So to get to persisting complexes, so for an expert, you have to last longer than 60 seconds. It takes like 7. It doesn't take all 20. But ultimately, to make the full particle, you would need all of them. So that's one thing we don't understand yet, is how these early steps that we were focusing on, how they connect to the very end steps.
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Anthony Fauci in the radio about like half a year ago said that the new flu vaccine will be a mixture of 5 messenger RNA for all possible flu, strains.
Yeah.
So do you know anything about this, and do you know whether that's actually been in making, or are we getting the normal flu vaccine this year? What are we getting this
No, I'm
year?
pretty sure this year it's not. I don't think that technology is ready for prime time. And I know that even people have been bandying this about for the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. Like in future, could you have a vaccine that's a mixture of of different variants, so you could be protected against a spectrum? And what one person who works on the vaccine told me was it's still a challenge for delivering an adequate quantity of the messenger RNA, right, in the vaccine particles. And once you start giving that quantity up, right, between multiple flavors, then you don't have enough of each flavor to do the job. That's what I took away. It's the current hurdle for what's holding that technology back.
Thank you.
You would agree? Yes.
Let's stop it here. I mean, we'll be around. We'll have a chance to discuss. Well, thanks, Sarah. So my job is coming to an end. We should thank speakers. Of course, from my side, the audience was wonderful, very exciting, and I give the floor to Mr. Ambassador for closing remarks.
I think we are all just the last few sentences. It's really amazing, and obviously for a diplomat, impossible to make a wrap up from the substance point of view, because the things, as we learn, are very complex. But at the end of the day, what I think is the message of this symposium, that we have to think positively, we have to put science in the center, we have to enhance the trust, and we have to do better communication. And for that, we need a better collaboration. And of course, I would add at the end, because we are talking now mainly this axis, if I can say, Europe, United States, that we put the humans, individuals, in the center of all the developments the science is now doing. Of course, together with this digital transformation and everything what is going on. And today we were also in a way privileged, those who were not able to come here, they were privileged to listen to those really beautiful and excellent lecture. So I will stop here because I see Mr. Žarko, who is the main chef. I would like to thank you once again. I would like to thank my team. I think one of the messages was also that without a good team, it's actually nothing. So teams should collaborate, should work together. And now first thing, I think, because we all, our throats are very dry, we will go and get a glass of Slovenian wine. And in the meantime, Mr. Žarko.
Let's do photo. I'm sorry.
Yeah, photo, speakers, of course. And then and then a glass of Slovenian wine, and then the food is following. And I'm actually encouraging this very. I felt like in a beehive. So that this debate will go on, and let's make it traditional. And I'm already challenging Professor Dr. Plavec maybe next year to, in a way, extend it. Yeah. Okay, thank you once again. Yeah, well, I don't know if I can fit in the photo.
And then I need one.